Okay, boys, how are you feeling?
Nervous.
Huh?
Nervous.
20%. This is Kashish, the guy who's responsible for the poor performance of the channel.
China is ruining our domestic competitiveness. China is undercutting us. China is selling goods at discount. They're dumping steels, EVs, solar panels, wind, whatever you want to call it. Trump said, I'm going to bring back jobs from China. It's all dumb. It's retarded. It makes more logical sense. It's not even possible, even in a very fantasy realm.
Zepto has raised up
Zepto,
800 rounds.
this year was like crazy for them. I think they raised more than $1 billion.
For people listening, that's roughly 8,500 crores.
Yes.
You had a point to make.
So basically, I forgot the point I had to make. On the day of my wedding reception, I realized that I did not have shoes. I'm like scared for my life. And at the wedding venue, I'm calling my mom. My mom's like, I do not know what to do. And as the last thing, I just open like the apps and just go like black shoes. 3 minutes.
I mean, that's crazy.
My fascination with AI is its economic angle. I'm really fascinated about what impact will it have on the productivity, jobs, people's lives, because ultimately my job can be taken away by AI.
People will be unemployed because of AI.
See,
Okay, boys, how are you feeling?
Good. Everyone talk. Nervous.
Huh?
Nervous.
Okay, 20%. Okay, so this is the team that, these are all the faces and fingers behind Daily Brief.
Finger sound long. Really long.
We started this, when was it? July
July.
was the first episode.
4th July, I think. 4th July or 26th July.
Yeah, so just to give some context on how it started, I mean, it was very unplanned. I mean, you guys all remember. It was literally Nitin saying that whenever I go outside India, I don't have a daily podcast to keep track of India markets. And FinShots is just one story, even though it's a really good, amazing podcast. Sagar was also one of the brains behind the podcast. So me and him on the way to the office in Bangalore traffic, we said, there should be a channel called MarketsbyZerodha. Unimaginative name. So then we started. I still remember me and Anurag discussing the very first horribly written script. And then it was just a natural experiment. None of us really planned anything. But almost 5 months down the line, you know, the kind of love we've received, it's nuts. I mean, I honestly didn't expect it. It was totally unplanned considering, I mean, even today, everything that we do is literally unplanned.
I mean, this particular...
even this, and we'll get to it later. The idea behind markets was to essentially do that, like in the sense that simplify what's happening in the markets, the big stories. And I think we've done a fair job. Can it be better? Of course, anything can be better, but I'm sure we'll get there. But in a very short span of time, I'm really happy that we've become, like, for a large part of the people, traders and investors, Daily Brief has become the go-to podcast. It still feels a little unreal to me. We had done a meetup in Bangalore. Some of you have, at least 50 of you have some sense of who the faces are. So my name is Bhuvan. Along with all these people, I work on the channel. This is Pranav. He's one of the best writers in all things finance. You guys will read a lot more of his stuff. He's also a phenomenal researcher on a lot of things in finance. This is Kashish, the guy who's responsible for the poor performance of the channel. I mean, Anurag, you guys know he's probably one of the best hosts for all things finance in India, hands down. Daily Brief is in many ways what it is thanks to his amazing presentations.
And by the way, we haven't missed a single episode of the Daily Brief since we started.
Crazy. No, I'll give you some context because I started writing it first. I honestly didn't think we'd pull it off. And then finally, that's Krishna. So on most days, Krish and Krishna do all the heavy lifting in most of the stories. In fact, I'd go so far as to say these two kids are some of the brightest researchers in all things finance by a mile. It kind of scares me. Pranav, I keep telling Pranav saying that, no, it's kind of scary how much these kids know. Because initially it was just me and Pranav when we were working on subtext and all those long form.
Let's have this reflect in the appraisal also.
In your case, it will be disappointing. I mean, it's been 5 months since we did this. The idea behind doing this was, again, like a lot of the shows that we have done, like Beyond the Charts, Big Perspective, even this was unplanned. So the reason behind doing this, I know this is a long-winded intro. It's been 5 months since we started, and this has been a landmark year in many ways. If you think about all the events that have happened in the markets, the broader economy, even the global economy for that matter. Me and Pranav were discussing in another context. I don't think I can recollect another year where so much has happened in such a short span of time. Maybe this is just nostalgia where people will always make out the current year to be the most challenging year, but I can honestly say that a ton of interesting things have happened, consequential things also. And a lot of things, even though we've written about some of the topics that we're about to discuss in the Daily Brief, not all of them have had a conclusion. So the idea behind this we're calling it roundtable. It's a terrible name, but we'll go with it. Is to talk about those. So that means all of you kids, and give an update on what has happened in that topic, because you guys do most of the writing, and in fact, a lot of the topics that we're about to discuss, even I don't know much about it. So you guys will have to do most of the heavy lifting. Today's morning, somebody messaged saying that on the YouTube comment section, can you upload it at 6? We do it at 7. No, he had a point in the sense that he has to be in office by 8. So he was saying that he doesn't get the time to listen to it, so he listens to it in the evening. Which means there are a lot of people who probably have missed out on a lot of important things that have happened in the market. Yeah. So for those people, this will be like a primer saying that, okay, here's 2024 in roughly 1 hour. I'm guessing we won't do it, but before we start, you guys have anything to add?
One of the things is that since we started, there are a bunch of things I have learned. Essentially, I haven't tracked the markets anytime. It's just the 5 months that I have started seeing what is happening in the markets. You know, what moves certain things, which is nobody knows what's happening in the markets really. Yeah.
Adding on to this only, this one thing I've learned so much is that I don't know shit. Especially after interacting with people like you and reading all these fancy authors that you guys casually name drop. It's made me realize how little I understand about how things work, but still gives me much more confidence that I can now still make sense of what's happening, even though
we're all bringing it in one way or the other. Okay, so let me set the stage for you guys, and then we'll dive right into it. So even today, if you look at the news, if you look at any article, there's that quote unquote India growth story. But I think we're in a spot where things are seeming a little shaky. The last GDP print was 5.4%, which was below expectations. If you look at the high frequency indicator, so what do I mean by that? Let's say two-wheeler sales, PV sales, tractor sales. If you look at Manrega demand, if you look at power consumption, all the IIP data, if you look at consumption expenditure data, if you look at even some segments of the markets, if you look at commentary from FMCG companies in the bygone quarter, it seems like we are experiencing, let me call it a temporary slowdown. This is a topic that can get quickly political. I'm already imagining the comments saying that this and that, but we're not going to get into the politics of it. But let me say this, things are in a lull. But despite that, on a relative basis, India is still in a much stronger footing compared to a lot of this country. This is not just me saying that India growth story and all that. We definitely have an opportunity, even if you assume that this is a cyclical low or whatever you want to call it. With that said, I think in the last 5 months, I think one of the biggest things that I personally was rather shocked was, let me put it this way, the broad theme was consumption behavior in India. If you look at the sectors, if you look at commentary from CEOs of FMCG companies, etc., I think things are really, really changing. And
yeah, there are a bunch of comments around that urban isn't growing enough, but on the other hand, if you look at the rural part of it, I mean, every CEO or the management is saying that rural is growing faster than urban. Now, what does that really mean?
Of course, slice this into multiple ways. There is quick commerce, there is the urban-rural divide in consumption, there are broader trends in terms of sales, demand, etc. But I think for me, because I have a lot of context in different ways, including speaking to other people, etc., this rise of quick commerce is just kind of astounding. Yeah. And initially, I mean, I'll be honest, I was skeptical of the model itself. I used to think that, like, how can somebody ride in 5 minutes and then make money out of it? But it seems like it's different. And Krishna, you've done most amount of research. Yeah. I mean, in fact, not a day goes by where we wake up, where we don't wake up with some news article from this fellow saying that quick commerce is quick commerce there. For a brief moment, it could have been called the Daily Brief / Quick Commerce podcast. It's okay. What the hell is quick commerce? What are we talking about? What has happened? Why is the big deal? Does it work? Does not it work? How the hell can anybody make money by doing it in 5 minutes?
I mean, I started looking at quick commerce, like it's been a long time. I think it's around when Zepto had launched. Okay. So, you know, you remember when people were posting screenshots on Twitter saying ki I got my order delivered in 8 minutes, 9 minutes, etc. Right. At that point of time, I didn't know how to research, how to go about it, but it's been the recent time, and I think this is the year that was for quick commerce. Yeah. I mean, you saw everyone raising funds, Swiggy IPOing, Zomato doing a QIP round of around 8,000 crores or something. Then a bunch of, you know, existing players, existing e-com players, the OG guys, Flipkart, Amazon entering this space again, Reliance, for example. But let me go back 10 years back. 10 years back, quick commerce was non-existent.
Dude, like 5 years back.
I mean, exactly. It's just around COVID that things started popping.
After COVID, I remember like complaining in, I think, 2020, or whenever Zomato first talked about 10-minute delivery, and all of us were, talking about how this is a service that has no real customer. Why the hell does anyone want delivery?
I mean, yeah, that was a long going comment that everyone is saying. भाई किसको चाहिए 10 मिनट में डिलीवरी? What's the point?
So my biggest complaint with the model was they're riding like crazy people. They're gonna.
I think there's a very small class of products where there isn't customer demand before that product is launched, but that product teaches customers to behave a certain way. Quick commerce, I think, is like an industry that has done that, and it's just done that in the last maybe 2 or 3 years.
It's like that manifesting, that industry manifested itself.
But if you had to take a rough guess as to how much of a percentage is quick commerce in the grocery market,
You're gonna tell us now.
I mean,
What? This is unnecessary.
around,
Get to it.
it's just 2% of the entire grocery market now. I mean, considering it was almost non-existent.
So this includes ye side wale vegetable vendors also.
No. Yeah, I mean, unorganized, that you don't really know. You can't. The data is unorganized.
I mean, data as a whole in India, it's terrible. Like you take anything else, it's a long-standing grouse that I have. I keep complaining to Pranav. Our data is, I mean, we need a lot more data than we have today. Like large parts of our economy is dark.
So
Okay, wait. So set the stage. Who are the biggest players? And start from pre-COVID or post-COVID period. Tell me what has happened. Set the stage for people to understand, then we'll dive deeper.
okay. So as I said, it was non-existent even 3 years back. The biggest players, if you see, is quick commerce, which is 30-minute delivery, which was first. I think Swiggy had started it. They had said in their recent filings when they did the IPO, then everyone started flocking in. Then Zepto came around the COVID period, and then they decided to do 10-minute. Now, since one of the players is doing 10-minute delivery, every other guy has to do. I mean, it's like they don't want Zepto to take all the market share. So everyone started entering in. And then quickly, the behavior started changing. From people ordering 2 years back, that was like कि अगर मेरा cook आया है और I want tomato or methi at the last minute, that was the app. I mean, that was the thing. But now if you see, they've become into a giant mall. Like you can literally get
You can buy
anything
washing machines right now.
Exactly. I mean, like just now we ordered the protein bars. I mean, they might be on the way.
I'll tell you one story. So on the day of my wedding reception, I realized that I did not have shoes.
Your wedding?
I mean, e-commerce doing marriages.
Your clothes were covered.
My father-in-law is about to erupt on me, right? I'm like scared for my life. I'm at the wedding venue. I'm calling my mom. My mom's like, I do not know what to do. It's 7 a.m.
I mean,
And as a last ditch thing, I just open like the apps and just go like black shoes. 3 minutes.
yeah. I mean, that's crazy. It's really crazy.
I have an embarrassing story. So I ordered a pillow.
I know this. You've told me this, yeah.
So I have a small space above my place. So I was lazy. I didn't want to go down and crash. So I ordered a pillow. He came upstairs. He gave me a pillow. I slept.
I mean, but the thing is, if you see all this like items being delivered or all these things, these are driven by something called as a dark store. Think of it as a mini warehouse. Like it's maybe around. Just don't quote me on the number. The range is around.
No, you can confidently bullshit.
It's around 6,000 square feet to 8,000 or 10,000 square feet. Now the thing is, they keep every item that people order often. So they have a whole analytics.
Like, how do they figure out what to store?
I mean, that's the analytics that they have.
Correct.
But I'll move on to the part about how a delivery guy goes on to pick those things.
I open my app. I place an order. What happens?
Let's say you order 4-5 things.
Okay.
Now the delivery guy will go to the dark store.
Okay.
There will be a picker there.
Okay.
The picker will have a 90-second window of taking each of these things. So there will be an app, and the app will be guiding you.
Like Google Maps inside the store.
Yeah, Google Maps inside the store. So the guy will pick up those things and deliver to you. But all these guys raising money, whether it's, as I mentioned, Swiggy doing the IPO, Zomato doing the QIP.
Zepto has raised up
Zepto,
800 rounds.
Yeah, this year was like crazy for them. I think they raised more than $1 billion. I mean, their valuation is something around.
For people listening, that's roughly 8,500 crores.
So let's say if you're talking about a Zomato or a Swiggy, what what do they own? Do they just own the app? Do they own the real estate? Do they own the warehouses? What's
I mean, the regulations in India are little gray on that. So I don't want to comment on that because the ownership structure is a little gray because think of it as them leasing property or something like that.
But do they manage the warehouses, or are these warehouses owned by some third party?
I mean, it is managed. Yeah, it is known, but it is not known. I mean, there's no clarity on this. I mean,
Okay, so but like there were a lot of this. The finance minister, even Piyush Goyal, the Ministry of Commerce, they were all making noise. What was that? What is all that about?
so these guys, the ministers, Piyush Goyal, there are a bunch of other guys also were saying ki quick commerce is taking share away from kirana stores. There were a bunch of reports. I mean, there were so many reports that were saying ki quick commerce is taking share from kirana stores.
Are they?
But the thing is, how do you actually know? Because there is no organized data. How
Not
do you,
your job, dude.
I mean, there's no data available. I mean, there was some, I think JP Morgan did a report where they went to kirana stores. I think some 100 or 150 stores and
But that's terrible sample.
Yeah,
I mean, exactly. That's how they were collecting data.
This is
And
the same report that you were talking about 2-3 days ago.
the JP Morgan report.
That is the report I was talking about.
so they were saying that 59% of the stores that they surveyed, they are saying ki 59% of the stores are getting affected because of the quick commerce.
Let me tie all this together. So quick commerce was virtually non-existent in 2020. Now it's sizable. So by any yardstick, even the fact that even if it's 2%, it might seem like a small number. The fact that a non-existent structure of commerce is 2%, it's significant.
Yeah.
So give me a pecking order. Who's the biggest?
So quick commerce, Blinkit is the one who tops.
So Blinkit is Zomato.
Yeah, Blinkit is Zomato.
Okay.
Then there is Swiggy and Zepto doing a tie-up thing.
Achha.
Like Swiggy is Instamart and Zepto, obviously. So they are in the range, similar range. Blinkit has about 41-42% of the market share, and the remaining is divided mostly between.
So they've raised so much money.
Yeah.
Why?
As I said earlier, it's about all the race to dark store because dark stores are the essence of how a quick commerce can actually work.
Okay.
Like the more stores they have, the more locations
expand.
that. Let's say you and I live in this area.
Okay.
The dark store can only cater to that 2-kilometer radius.
Okay.
They can't go out because the delivery time will get extended.
Right.
So dark store needs to be there in every location.
Okay.
So that's why like these guys are raising more and more money so that they can cater to every audience,
Is this so?
every consumer.
So where is quick commerce really exploding? Is it only in hyper crowded metro cities? Is it going into tier 2, tier 3?
I mean, mostly it's just tier 1 cities. I mean, think about it. Tier 1 guys would obviously feel more comfortable paying a 10 rupee, 20 rupee fee delivery fee.
Pricing, do they mark up the goods?
I mean,
So I was just speaking to a friend early this morning, a colleague. What she told me is she went to Nature's Basket, bought the exact same basket of vegetables and fruits, etc. And she went to Swiggy, Instamart or one of those apps and bought the exact same, put the exact same pieces of fruits and vegetables in the basket. Swiggy Instamart was 400 and the Godrej was $250. So I think that is the amount of difference that you have in just fruits and vegetables. Now, talking about products which have an MRP associated with them, let's say a packet of chips or something on those lines, I'm guessing the delta will be a lot lower. Okay. But in terms of those perishables where you don't have an MRP per se,
Right.
I'm guessing the delta is quite high, and that is where these
I mean, but the
players
thing
mark
is,
up
isn't the
prices.
delta justified because that person has to go to the store and get the groceries? This guy is
No,
also-
sir. I'll be honest. So my initial skepticism is who in the right mind should pay that convenience fee.
I mean, today, if I'm so used to ordering from an Instamart, I'm not even aware of what the rate is at DMart or what the rate is at.
That's such a privileged statement to make. I mean, who doesn't know?
But there is one thing that I think we missed touching upon, which is why quick commerce is such a big deal. It's not about the money that is going in. It's not about all those things. I mean, FMCG companies, let's say HUL, Nestle, all those guys have started mentioning quick commerce in their earnings call.
Yeah.
And they're saying quick commerce is a significant chunk of their online sales. I mean, online sales is not a big part of
But
their-
all of this has happened in the last 2-3 result seasons.
this year. I mean, this year only. I mean, so I mean,
Give me a roundup of like like, is it pretty much all the FMCG majors?
Yeah, like HUL, as I mentioned, Nestle, as I mentioned, there are Dabur mentioned it. So they're saying it's roughly 30 to 40%. I mean, roughly in that range, 30 to 40% of their online sales.
Even if it's 30%, forget it. Even if it's 10% of online sales, it was zero.
Zero, exactly.
So,
and this behavior change has, I mean, there was nothing previously that changed behavior so quickly. The last thing was e-commerce, which was really long back. The other thing which I mean, about modern retail guys.
Okay.
Let me take an example of
what's modern?
Modern retail matlab?
Reliance Retail, DMart, or supermarkets essentially. So DMart in their earnings call, like I think the second quarter earnings call had mentioned that OVC, quick commerce is rising and all those things, but it's not impacting us.
I remember that statement. Like they said that this is for the last mile people who don't mind paying a convenience fee, like you said. I think they changed the tune later.
Yeah, in the quarter 3 press release, they didn't do an earnings call. So, I mean, they don't do a bunch of times, but yeah, in the press release, they said that quick commerce is affecting their business. I mean, they didn't say any numbers and anything, but so that's a really, like, that's a mark of how quick commerce is like changing things.
If you remember when we were doing the, I think first or second story, I forget, we were doing all those, reading through all those reports. And I think I pointed out, you pointed out, saying that this model hasn't worked anywhere in the world except India.
Exactly.
Why?
I mean, the first thing is labor. Okay. The other thing is
cheap labor.
I mean, it can't. So cheap labor is one of. I mean, we are employed, so that's a sign. So cheap labor is one of the things. The other thing is like people willing to pay a little more here for that.
I think
convenience.
Also with inequality also, because consumers are the ones who literally are on the top end of the spectrum.
That's just
No, the fact that both cheap labor and premium customers existing in the same economy is something very unique to India. In a manner, and I mean that's been pointed out a lot of the times. We won't segue into that, but I think that could be a possible reason. Because if there's cheap labor, there's got to be someone paying up also, no? And that's happening.
Okay. But does the fact that India is a much more dense country have anything to do with it?
I mean, that's also
Dense and diverse.
No, like I remember
In terms of how the dark stores can be located, say for example, if you take the example of a Finland, you know, your house could be miles away from my house,
that's what I was getting
and there could be nobody in my vicinity for a company to have business sense.
Really good example.
No, I'm talking in extremes, but you know, largely get the point. But,
Real extreme.
but considering, you know, let's say we are in JP Nagar, Bangalore right now, there are so many households in this entire area, and it makes a lot of business sense for a lot of companies to come and set shop here. So that also makes a big difference. Plus, there's also cheap labor, willingness
all
to
in
pay.
hindsight, but
Of course.
like.
Does this also mean that ये जो गांव वगैरह हैं, tier 3 cities, it will never work there because they're sparsely?
That's a question I have.
I was talking to someone regarding this. What if quick commerce comes into your town? Will it do anything? The thing is, you really don't know. I mean, it's
That's almost the same as asking someone 5 years ago, do you want 10-minute delivery? They'll probably say no.
We didn't know it.
I mean,
that's what we
like,
discussed.
let's say now there's a new thing that has come up, which is the 10-minute food delivery thing. Do you think it will work? I mean,
Me and Pranav are too old to be positive about anything in life.
the thing is, I mean, that's the next big thing I'm guessing.
The fact
because
of the matter is that, see, most presumptions about how a business should work are dated, right? So you believe that Indians have a certain level of disposable income and people sort of are willing to spend in a certain fashion, but those beliefs are informed by what Indians were like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're also learning about how India works in real time as these businesses are growing.
last year, Zomato had tried doing the 10-minute food delivery thing, but they closed it down saying the unit economics don't work out. But the thing is, they started again because Swiggy got, Zepto started the Zepto Cafe thing. Then Swiggy also came in.
Wait, so
Blinkit also.
how big of a factor is FOMO that is leading all these people to do all
I mean,
this?
the other thing is they don't want to have the other player get the market share. I mean, there are only two guys in the food delivery space, Swiggy and Zomato.
Right. What's the menu that's available? Like, is it healthy stuff?
It's not healthy stuff. Maybe at best you got ready-made salads of sorts. So stuff which you can actually prepare and keep in your fridge, or there are burgers and stuff like that, which can be pre-prepared and
But if you think about like getting a coffee, I mean, coffee seems...
Or like the kind of person who would go for a fast sauce.
Acha.
For them, this seems like fairly decent idea.
So make obesity great again. Okay.
Yeah. No, but I've ordered 10 minute. I have ordered 10 minute and I ordered Burger King. So my
10 minute में Burger King.
10-minute Burger King.
Burger King is doing 10 minutes.
Yeah. On Swiggy.
Oh,
Swiggy
on
board.
Swiggy. Oh,
Haan, on Swiggy burger. This thing.
Why can't we wait for anything anymore?
No, I wanted to give it a try. So what I realized is at least that 10 minute, I don't know if it's the result of it being new or whichever way, but that burger was a lot different and better as compared to
In a good way.
in a good way. It was much fresher and things like this.
Oh, burger was fresher. Sure.
No, but I mean, from a food standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. But I don't know how much of that quality can be maintained because it all again depends on how much demand continues to come into that space.
Like amongst you guys, has any element of your consumer behavior changed because of this?
Yeah.
I don't walk in.
So
Yeah.
we used to do like ये flatmates. We used to do DMart visits every week or every other week. Now we just keep on sending super saver Zepto के links कि ये चाहिए. हम हफ्ते के एंड में वो वहाँ से मंगा लेते हैं because we did a price comparison. Even sometimes some products are cheaper on these things MRP products than DMart, and it saves us आने जाने का वो.
So it is true, right? It's sort of like having a genie on command, whatever you can possibly want.
Yeah. That's
I mean-
a new. I mean,
I literally had, like, there was this one night where my wife and I were feeling cold, so we just got new quilts in 10 minutes. Like,
guys ordering shadi ke shoes.
Homeless person? You don't have shoes, you don't have blankets.
I'm a person who's living in late 2024, where you can get whatever you want. It's, I mean, I think at a certain point, quickness, it's not an...
It spoils us.
Yeah, it's not like it's just a difference in degree. It's a difference in kind. It's a different kind of product when you can just get something in 5 minutes or 8 minutes. Your entire behavior completely changes, right? Like as soon as you have a desire,
It's a new high.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap this up. I think we have spoken about too much. 3 big trends for next year and 3 predictions.
I mean, the first thing is this 10-minute food delivery thing.
Okay,
I mean,
prediction on that.
I'm really skeptical on it. Ki how will it even work? I mean, why would someone like it's a repeat business? If the first time is not good, someone won't order it again. I mean, would you order the same burger again?
Okay, next.
That's the other thing. The other thing is this quick commerce being expanding with more SKUs, which is the number of items that they have.
So you just wanted to say SKU.
I just wanted to sound cool. So, no, like, how many more type of products that they can add? I mean, they already have the PS5.
What's the prediction there?
I mean, they'll turn into an even larger mall. I mean,
Okay, wait,
you
let me
can,
put it this way. Will I...
they can order a bike or something. I'm thinking.
Okay,
can you
will I order a bike next year or...
next? I mean, maybe. I mean, Amazon sells bike. By the way.
Who orders that?
Rich people.
It's, I mean, Anurag.
Okay, third.
I think there will come a point where that Kirana debate will start having more substance. There will be more data available on it.
No. So
Or-
this traders is a big political community for a lot of political parties. In fact, political parties directly influence the largest trade unions in this country. So I mean, if I were to bet on it, this debate would get much more louder. But yeah, like we'll sides up the politics of it. So okay, final prediction.
10-minute food delivery working or not, that's the other thing. That quick commerce, I mean, it'll boom. I think even more.
Okay, so this is an interesting debate on quick commerce. Okay, so we'll move on to the next topic.
Diamonds are so like out of reach for someone few years back. Ki they wanted it, but you can't because there is such a huge price.
Yeah, but it's also a reminder of your poverty, no?
No, frankly, but it's not Sasta Mal in that the only mental adjustment you have to make is that this is not...
Okay, no, mental adjustment bhi nahi. How would you actually tell the difference between a natural diamond or a real lab grown?
So I did some research in terms of talking to shopkeepers, etc., on how we can identify. and
Wait
things
one
like
second,
this.
you're doing research before you...
Of course.
What's wrong with you?
When I had to buy a ring for her. So I was asking shopkeepers as to, how it works, because I thought that is the most ground level research that you can do, reports, etc., will still paint a bit of a rosy picture. So they said naked eye, you just cannot. You can be an expert in lab grown diamonds and natural diamonds, whatever, but naked eye is something you cannot make, differentiate both of them from.
Naked eye.
I thought you were going to say something. I mean,
But there are whatever machines and tests, etc., that you can differentiate them using. Problem is the the resale value because of lab-grown diamonds now for natural diamonds has also fallen down quite a bit. So my mom did this, resale check for one of her old jewelry pieces from back during her wedding
Your
days.
entire family runs like a research shop or something, is it? You're doing research. 300 million. Acha.
But my mom, found out for one of her bangles back from, 10, 15 years back, the price is less than half at this point in time. And
There are diamonds on the bangle.
There are diamonds on the bangle, and the jewelry guy said, I'm not even going to keep it. If there is a buyer, I will call you up. That time you come and give it to me. I'm not even giving you any guarantee.
Like for diamonds.
I think this. I don't view this from a consumption perspective, but how people used to view diamonds as an investment. That whole notion is.
Was it really the case?
De Beers doing the whole diamond is forever.
Diamond
and all
is
those
forever.
things.
Well, a lot of these people pointed out, like, is it true? Like this was like.
The fact that they're talking about resale.
No, recently what they
No.
the
Like
diamond price.
in the sense that this was artificially created.
So diamonds are not rare per se. So that the rarity is artificially created using marketing from De Beers. So there was this entire campaign that De Beers ran.
But how did you both fall for it?
It's just the.
They didn't know. They bought the lab grown one.
They were the real one. Wives got the lab grown.
So we gave it. No?
Our in-laws got the real ones because our in-laws had that sentimental value.
Correct.
There's like a get out of jail free card. Okay, sorry, go on.
No, but I think this entire scarcity was artificially created using advertisements and things like those that diamonds are associated with weddings and important events, etc. So in the traditional sense, diamonds are not actually rare. Okay. And I think many people watching this would also know this. But it was all artificially created. Now the fact of the matter is, it basically has decoration value on a human being at this point.
Decoration.
That's a good term. Decoration.
Sorry, wait, go on. Go on.
Probably nothing more than that. At this point, and considering now lab-grown diamonds are whatever 1/8, 1/10 the price of a natural diamond, I think that value of a natural diamond will also go down, and we're starting to see trends, early signs of that in the US and other advanced.
Oh yeah, the US, I think 50%. I think the last 1 year, 50% drop in sales compared to
I mean,
Price.
Sales.
De Beers had to cut their diamond prices, which is a really big thing.
Oh yeah, that's a big deal. I think we spoke about it.
Yeah,
Another trend which not too many people know. My wife pointed this out some time ago. All the other important elements like emeralds and other such lesser valuable than diamond elements also had a lab grown era, early 2000s and around that time.
You mean the stud?
Correct.
Gems,
Other gems and stones. So they also had a bit of a lab-grown era at early 2000s or sometime around that time, but it all died down very quickly because there was a different market. It still exists. So if you go buy a lab-grown emerald, you will find it somewhere. But the fact of the matter is, it's not as hyped up as a lab-grown diamond, and that probably goes to show that maybe there is a market that will differentiate these two products and consider them very separately altogether, say 5 years later once the hype died.
Meta question. So I kind of see a through line between QC and diamond also. So QC changed consumer behavior in terms of immediacy, in terms of convenience. Lab grown, is it fair to say that, let's say, not old people are more comfortable with lab grown diamonds in the sense that it's the newer generation which is comfortable with it?
Yes.
Like,
That's a good point. Yeah.
if that's the case, like, gun to each of your head, do you see a lot of other traditionally ingrained consumer behaviors, be it jewelry or whatever it is, like changing so dramatically? You're saying how cheap is a lab-grown diamond?
Like 1 carat is natural wala is 3-4 lakh, and this lab.
That's a big drop. Like, if that's the case, do you guys see, like, I mean, if you were to speculate wildly, like, what would you say will change because there's a generational shift in attitudes or whatever you want to call it?
I think, unfortunately, with luxury products, you can never tell, right? Because the economics is upside down.
Yeah.
So often people are buying scarcity; they're not buying the product itself.
Yeah, it's signaling.
But the thing is, there's a counter thing to here because this is marketed as eco-friendly. If it's not, and all those things, that's a separate topic. This is marketed as a eco-friendly, and considering the woke and like how the next our generation is.
Woke.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, but I mean, I think this pretty much sums up a lot of what, like, but the diamond industry is in real trouble. I think Surat, which is the hub for all diamonds, like I remember when we were doing the story that all the diamond tiers
were crying. They're laying off people. Even Gautam Adani made a statement saying that diamantaires are in trouble. I hope I got that right. What's happening there? You know?
So I'm not sure of the numbers, but it's hard for me to speculate that the diamond industry is going down. Nahin. The thing is ki, all those orthodox diamond guys who will still be sticking to the natural.
Stop using orthodox fancy words. You know?
They'll still be sticking to the natural diamonds.
Achha.
But I saw a lot of interviews on all these news channels जहाँ उन्होंने relatively younger entrepreneurs बुलाए थे who are working in the diamond industry. They have very well embraced lab-grown diamonds.
Right.
And if I understand the process correctly, even though it's a lab-grown diamond or a natural diamond, जो उसके ऊपर कारीगरी होगी, work done is still the same. So
we were debating this. I'm not sure about this.
I mean, there was no conclusion.
Right.
Yeah, I went back and
Okay, if somebody is listening, the margins for a merchant or a guy doing diamond cutting and polishing is the same as for both real and. Okay, I don't know if this is true. We'll find out in the comments.
I mean, if someone is a diamond
Crowdsourcing our research. Okay, continue.
But so this is why I feel ki all those old guys are eventually shifting.
Got
but
it.
I don't know.
Okay, so to you, what are the traditional retailers doing? Like, so who's sold on LGDs, who's not?
I mean, there are Birla recently entered with POM, which is
What is POM?
POM is their jewelry brand that they've started, which is
How do you spell that?
POME.
You sure?
Yeah, POME. So they've recently gone into the jewelry market, which they're betting on that young guys will.
What about Titan?
buy. Titan is outright saying ki we don't see demand on the store level, and they're trying to tell people ki this is natural and not.
Honestly, there's a mixed signal there because Titan के लिए when I was doing the research, what Titan had done well was कि वो gold verify करवाते थे, and that set the trend.
They are trying to do the same thing with diamonds also कि ये natural है, and
As in they'll help you certify it.
yeah कि नहीं मतलब हाँ in a way कि
They'll help you figure out if it's real or
Yeah.
fake.
And
Interesting.
by doing that, they're giving mixed signals. एक जगह वो कह रहे हैं कि lab-grown diamond के they're completely dismissing, but at the same time they're also venturing into this.
But there is one thing that, I mean, in the last to last earnings call or somewhere I saw ki they have an investment in a US company which is into lab-grown diamonds.
It's a nice hedge.
But the thing is, I think it's just about to get to know the market or something.
I mean, they can afford it.
Because that's a very tiny stake or something. So, I mean, it's a...
Okay, like we'll get past this. I mean, none of us really can afford real. I can afford, no, you guys can't. So,
What about Bansal?
so the other big thing was, I think we'll quickly skim past it, was this entire rural versus urban debate. So I'll set some context. This ties to the entire economic slowdown, or at least temporary slowdown.
So you're saying there was an economic slowdown in 2020?
I think, like, considering the latest GDP print. So I think we started off the year early. So Q3 2023 was roughly, I think 7 or 8% was the GDP. I forget the number. Q3 2024 we were at 5.4, which means there's a slowdown. So this is across the board, by the way, in the sense that if you look at every high frequency indicator, so power consumption, diesel consumption, wage growth, credit growth, which is a leading indicator, auto sales, excluding two-wheelers, which we'll speak out in a bit, by the way, excluding two-wheelers, PVs, CVs, everything is down across the board. Then even consumer confidence, I mean, I'm not really happy about the survey methodology, but people are less optimistic about the current situation, but more optimistic about the future situation. So to the extent that you can take this with 2 buckets of salt and maybe 3 buckets of chili powder, I think it tells you something. But we had done a Beyond the Charts episode on this. Like pretty much every indicator is
state of the economy.
Yeah, it's pretty much pointing down. But one interesting trend that I've noticed, I think I helped in the research. I didn't write the story, so you'll know better. Is that I heard commentary, and you'll have to confirm, saying that I think I remember Sonal Verma from Nomura and Madhvi Arora from MKV. So they were saying that there's a shift away from urban consumption to rural consumption. So which is to say that they are saying that urban consumption as measured by cement demand, steel demand, which gives you a proxy for real estate, then
FMCG, like Nielsen, which is a research firm, they do this high frequency panels for supermarket sales, etc. So both these people were saying that in-store visits are down. Then the other big indicator is credit growth, because most of the credit growth is predominantly urban. So there is a dramatic slowdown. And this is an interesting thing. It's your baby, so we'll get to that later. So there's a dramatic slowdown in unsecured lending, personal loans, credit card, across the board. But the interesting thing is, I mean, you pointed this out. In the quarter that was in the previous quarter, a lot of the management was saying that they are bullish on rural, but not so bullish on urban. So
this is like if you see any FMCG companies or any auto companies or anyone, they're saying that the rural demand is growing faster than urban demand. That doesn't mean the sales are as similar to urban. It's just that the percentage growth, because that's where most of the people are spending. I remember in the last earnings call or the last to last earnings call, Maruti had I think Maruti was the one, the SUV thing. So they were saying that rural guys are buying more SUV cars than normal, like a 10 lakh wala cars. So that is saying something that...
It reminded me of that, what was that, Nestle's management saying middle class was shrinking.
Yeah, middle class. This was a term that was coming across like every time, that middle class is shrinking, that people aren't buying anything. People are just saving. They are not buying. They are not doing discretionary spending, which is buying anything that is not needed but want.
Okay.
Which is basically that. But there are a bunch of other guys who are saying ki this is just a term. This is just 2 quarters mein kya malum padta hai.
Right.
So yeah.
On the rural side also,
you had done a story.
He talked about how urban mein growth is rural mein. So rural ki kuch high frequency indicators, let's say agriculture, right? Because a good chunk of rural income comes from agriculture.
Right.
Monsoons have been fine-ish, and the water reservoir levels, even they were fine. So overall, we had a decent enough monsoon, which tells us how the income would grow for a good chunk of rural population, which was very convincing. Then if we look at, let's say, tractor sales, again linked to agriculture, tractor sales are also doing very reasonably fine. And another thing on the rural mein, you talked about how unsecured lending, which is more of an urban. Agriculture loans have also been going up while this thing.
I forgot about this.
Agriculture loans are also picking up while the loans on the unsecured lending. So all of these indicators sort of cement the thing that we're talking about, narrative that we're talking about, that rural. But then again, is it temporary? Is it permanent? We don't know.
I think I don't know. Even I'm not too comfortable calling it a trend, considering it's just 1 or 2 quarters. I think if you look at food inflation, it's telling a conflicting story. So we'll have to wait for this. What's that, Rabi or Kharif? What's the post-monsoon thing?
Kharif, no?
Again, one more comment. So this will tell us what's going to happen.
I have a question here, quick question. This entire debate about rural versus urban, since Kashish and Krishna, you guys have worked on the story, maybe you can answer. Do you think this is because urban has grown quite a bit, say in the last 4-5 years, etc., and it has started to plateau now because it's hit a ceiling to some extent, and now the rural has started to pick up?
I mean, the thing is about that premiumization trend. Like every company focusing on like there was there are 2-3 alcohol players who are Radico and all. Most of their sales are coming, they're focusing on premium products, not the normal products, because like that's where most of their revenue is coming from.
No, what I'm talking about is, since we're talking about growth here and not absolute numbers, which is where my question...
So I'll answer your question. So it's going to be a little convincing. So my entire default view is any number post-COVID, it's severely distorted. It's very hard to compare post-COVID versus pre-COVID. Partly because in a weird way, that entire economic cycle, entire consumption cycle, credit cycle, all these cycles were compressed into such a short span of time. I was telling Kashish, we were discussing the banking story. Like, we have seen a credit cycle, at least in my relatively amateurish view, we have seen a credit cycle that should have played out over a period of, let's say, 5 years. It has played out in 2 years. And it's the same with, like, we saw all those things with revenge shopping, etc. Then the other unsaid thing, which we'll get to later here, is the impact of inflation. Like, this has hit household budgets really, really hard. So I don't know. Maybe there is some base effect at play here, in the sense that all that unspent income during the lockdowns got immediately spent after post-COVID. This was not just an Indian thing. It was a US thing also. Like, even today, thanks to all the stimulus checks, US households are in a far comfortable position than they were prior to COVID, which means they're sitting on a lot of unspent cash. Is that the case in India? I don't know. I don't think so, because we are a poor country, of course, so it's a very misleading comparison. But having said that, I think I get what you're saying. There is some base effect at play here.
There is some merit to it, but मतलब उसको इतने तक लेके जाना that calling it a structural thing happening, that's an overshoot.
Also, most of these things are cyclical, dude. I mean, there's always a shift away from this and all that. Plus, we are all talking about maybe 2 quarters.
2, 3.
Yeah. And also, we started only 5 months ago. So our gyan prior to 5 months is absolutely nothing. I can speak about personal finance and all that BS, but ask me about any company, I have absolutely no clue.
But if you like, from a bird eye view or anything, if you had to say anything about consumption that has happened in 2024, what is it like? Are people consuming or not? We'll do like, yeah.
Okay, so no, my take is we've seen a dramatic slowdown in consumption. Of course, that last print on the private consumption, it rose to, if I'm not wrong, 7.5 or something like that. That was, again, I'm a little hesitant to call it a recovery, because private consumption was down in the dumps. It's been significantly slowing since, I think, at the very least 2022. So I don't know, like, from whatever little, as an amateurish economic observer, some of the signs that I'm seeing, or whatever high frequency indicators we look at in our own research, they're all pointing downwards. Is this a trend? Is this a temporary blip? I mean, my crystal ball is as fuzzy as your guys. I'm not really a big fan of astrology. So I don't know. We are in a, let me put it, we are in a tricky spot. So where things go from here is anybody's guess.
And I think this conversation needed as much conversation as we had, because Indian GDP is 60% consumption only.
Yeah.
When we talk about consumption, either trends changing or growth or degrowth, all of that, it directly impacts the end number that everybody loves to look at, which is the GDP growth rate.
But I mean, that consumption is not consumption as you and I understand that, because that consumption is like
Government is a big chunk of that.
no anyone, like corporation, like any sort of entity that is basically buying something to consume in that year is consumption. Anything that it's buying for several years is investment, is that sort of thing. So I mean, that accounting identity is not what
I would say, because when you're talking about consumption, what are we talking about? People spending money, we'll go to banking. Sir, I mean, to set the context, this was a significantly action-packed year for the banking sector in more ways than one. On the regulatory front, on the consumer-facing front, on the business-facing front, on the economic. I mean, I'm of course repeating the same thing again, but it was a significantly action-packed year. Okay, so give the broad picture in terms of credit growth, in terms of the health of the banking sector, NPS, whatever. Like, what's since it's also a sector that you like tracking. If you take a step back as an amateur analyst, I mean, you are an amateur. So as an amateur analyst of the sector, what's your read? What's your read of the sector?
So yeah, banking definitely had lots of things happening, and that is by the virtue of what banking itself is, because banking gets impacted by almost everything. RBI को कुछ करना है, that gets impact, मतलब banks पे impact आता है. Consumers are spending or not spending, banks get impacted. So banks are at the center of most of the action that happens in the economy. Therefore, my interest. And
by the way, we didn't ask you why you care about it, but anyways, it's okay. Now that
so overall, if we talk about the whole view, right, and let's start with some headline numbers only. Let's start with credit growth, right? Credit growth was just again the headline number. It was very high at the start of the year, but we were seeing signs of it coming into phase where the growth was tapering off slightly, and now it is tapered off.
Okay, why to disaggregate it? Like when you say headline credit growth, get into the nerve.
Yeah, now I'll get into so credit growth. Again, loans have been given out left, right, and center to almost everybody. Banks want it, government wants it, people want it. So if we just talk about where was the most deviation happening, I think it had a lot to do with a lot of unsecured lending. That a cycle that started back in 2021, 2022, where lots of credit card debt, personal loans.
Is this tied to the post-COVID reopening, revenge shopping and all that?
We could attribute it to it, but I couldn't find solid numbers. But anecdotally, it makes sense. People wanted to spend a lot, and their incomes had not grown as much as their willingness to spend.
Okay.
Which is why they financed a lot of it through loans. And this is what we saw even in the household
So
consumption.
loans are growing.
Yeah, loans were growing, and also a good chunk of them were unsecured personal loans. So credit card debt was growing very fast.
Yeah. 40, above 40% year on year.
So,
Yeah.
if I were to give a
By the way, sorry, I still can't make sense of that number, dude. Like, when was the last time you saw loans growing 40%? It's just ridiculous.
but this is usually succeeded by something very bad happening because
Wow, thanks.
but so if the credit card industry was growing at let's say 40%, the whole industry credit growth was north of 19% for a good chunk of couple of months.
Is that a really big number? Like,
Wait, pre-COVID, how much was that? Roughly 10% or something like
Yeah,
that?
so 10 to 15 is a decent enough range.
so 19 is a
Yeah. So long-term average has remained 15% CAGR.
Okay.
Because there's GDP growth plus formalization of credit happening.
Right.
So add 2-3 more percent. 15% was considered very healthy growth.
Okay.
We saw this going up to 19% for good 1 to 3 quarters.
This is you're talking about systemic credit. Okay.
Systematic credit.
Okay.
So this was a huge number. And then it started coming down for reasons I've mentioned.
Okay.
And so this was one thing. Second thing was the deposit growth. And if people recall well, during mid of the year, everybody from Nirmala Sitharaman to our former governor was talking about how the credit is growing at a much faster pace than the deposit. And
Right.
that's a big problem according to them. Right. And there is some truth to it as well. There is some nuance to it where banks can only lend so much if they don't have enough deposits, because Kalko, if let's say people come in asking for their money and they don't have enough of it,
Right.
that becomes a problem. And when you're lending out more money than you're overextending yourself in a very oversimplified manner.
That's what the governor said.
Yeah, that's what the governor said.
Right.
So to just give you some numbers, at the peak, the difference between credit growth and deposit growth was 7%.
Okay.
Which basically means, again, the loans were growing at
Much faster than
much
the
faster
deposits.
pace than deposit growth.
Okay.
But for context, like credit is a small fraction of the deposit.
So on an absolute term,
you mean in volume?
yeah, in absolute
Yeah.
terms, there are larger deposits. So अगर हम absolute terms की बात करें, we were still getting decent deposits and decent credit.
ठीक है.
But this is just one headline number
Okay.
which captured all this media attention, and when we covered it, this had everyone worrying. Why do I talk about it? Because now this trend has reversed.
Okay.
So now we're at a point where credit growth and deposit growth are somewhere near 11%. So
Okay.
basically, the gap which was as high as 7% pehle,
It's now vanished.
now it's completely vanished.
ठीक है.
Which basically means both of them are growing at the same pace.
Okay. Talk about why is this happening?
Why is this? So again, there are a lot of things I could attribute this.
What a
Oh, also, one more thing I wanted to ask, like, did the deposit growth stop, or was it seemed like it was not growing because credit growth was so fast?
Deposit growth has more structural things working in its favor, whereas credit growth has a lot of cyclicality to it.
It's tied to the economic cycle.
Yeah.
Okay.
So deposit growth was at its long-term average.
Normally जैसे चलता है वैसे.
It was going as is.
People didn't stop putting in money in their FDs and savings banks.
But there were comments by, I mean,
No, so
people
I mean, this is
saying
a very
that the comment was basically that people are not putting their money in fixed deposits. All money is going to mutual funds.
I remember it. So just for context for people listening to this, if anything happens in the stock market, the money never leaves the banking system.
Exactly.
So I buy stocks.
Okay.
Where does the money go to? To the seller? It's in his bank account.
ठीक
The
है.
buyer buys. Where does he get the money from? This thing. It goes to the seller again. So money always remains in the banking system. So the nature of the money might change. It could be FD versus savings bank. Money never really. So most people saying that, all the money is going away from FDs to savings, the stock market. Dude, more importantly, there are like 10 crore Indians invest in stock market. What's the FD base? I forget the numbers.
70-80 crores. More.
No, lakh crores.
He is talking about the value.
Number of people.
Yeah.
At very fundamentally, any rupee that isn't in cash is sitting in a bank.
Yeah.
It's just how it is.
Yeah.
Any rupee that isn't a cash, is it? Yeah.
Because if you invest into a Reliance stock, it goes into a Reliance bank account, right?
The only exception to this is the primary market, which is a very small part of the overall stock market. I mean, this year has been.
But there were a bunch, like.
Yeah, I know.
many-
But anyways, so
Deposit growth.
you told me that credit growth and deposit growth have kind of
Merged.
Yeah. So what's leading to all this?
So a lot of it had to do with RBI being very vocal about how credit is growing at a much faster pace. This comes back to the point that Bhuvan pointed out. So credit cycle usually has been a 3 to 5 to 7 year thing, but after COVID, everything has gone haywire. This वजह से we saw credit cycle of 5 years shrinking into 2 years, and in those 2 years we had segments like credit cards growing at 40%. The whole systematic, मतलब पूरा credit growth growing at 19-20%. This was a cause of worry for RBI because RBI didn't want so much loan giving happening because this could also lead to NPAs, a lot of bad loans being given out.
Okay.
And this started showing up. Where unsecured lending. So we had MFIs. a good
Oh yeah,
chunk of that
MFI was a.
Wait, who did the MFA? You both did?
We both.
We'll get to that later. You finish your line of thought.
MFIs ho gaye. Then we had again credit card debt, SBI cards. When their numbers came out, they also showed.
Oh yeah, they were in really bad shape. I remember.
SBI cards are the biggest.
Biggest in the country.
No,
In terms of credit card issuances.
no SDFC.
You sure?
Yeah.
In terms of issuances or in terms of value?
No, I think it says big. But we'll verify this.
So NPA started showing up in all these places, and there were even cases of evergreening happening, which basically meant one borrower, in order to pay his one loan, was taking loan from another bank. And this happened where one borrower had 3 lenders giving him money so that the 4th lender could be paid off.
Okay, individuals are doing what industries were doing prior to 2010.
So this is exactly what I guess even I wrote in one of the stories. What happened in 18 and all ILFS, where there was a lot of corporate lending happening, and then NPA started showing up. There was a possibility right now. I don't know how much truth there is to it, and we still have.
By the way, that unsecured lending as the overall part of the system is small, but in terms of percentage numbers, it looks big.
Retail lending.
Yeah. I don't recollect the number. Something like, I think India Ratings had put out a note saying that unsecured lending as a whole is roughly, I think, 4 or 5% of the total systemic credit.
4-5% of the whole loans.
Yeah.
But
the rest of it goes to
but
agriculture,
for
industry.
non-corporate or wholesale, non-wholesale books of banks,
Yeah.
it could go as high as 10-20%.
Yeah, of course, at a disaggregated level, it looks very, very different.
But the value is still big.
Yeah. It depends on what bank you're looking at.
Exactly.
Unsecured credit is down.
And
NPAs,
showing up.
MFIs.
So RBI was worried about this, and then RBI came up with all these regulations, you could say. Few of them, the most prominent one was moral suasion, which is just a fancy way of saying, "Jada loan mat do." So they were basically behind the door asking fintech lenders and all of these guys to don't grow as fast as this.
Like, you can't prove this, right?
Yeah, we can't prove this.
Not me, you.
But so again, I just read news, and this makes sense. Moral suasion as a tool is often used by RBI.
Right.
Then another thing they did was increased weight ratings on all these consumer loans.
Oh, I remember this.
You
I
mean
think.
risk weights?
Yeah.
Yeah, risk weights.
Sorry, go on.
But what does that mean? Can you
Risk
explain?
weights का मतलब हुआ, if let's say for me to lend out 100 rupees of loan, hypothetically I need to keep 5 rupees in my with RBI to give out that loan. Now that 5 became 6, 7 or 8, which basically meant, especially just for consumer lending space where there is a lot of yield, which basically meant for a bank to now give out more loans, it needed to park more money with RBI,
Yeah.
which made it expensive for banks to lend it out.
Right.
Okay.
So that happened.
Okay.
Then risk weighting going up, moral suasion, all of these factors eventually led to this credit growth tapering down.
Okay, so but is it a slowdown across the board? Are some segments growing? Like, how does it look like if you disaggregate the entire credit?
Yeah, so for that, if we look at, let's say, things like housing loans.
Okay.
So housing loans, abhi tak the data was slightly messed up until last quarter because of the HDFC Bank merger. But even if we don't account for that, or even if we factor that in, housing loan growth has been very high. Now, be it affordable housing, which is, let's say, sub 10 lakh, sub 15 lakh loans being led by companies like Home First and all, or even, let's say, prime.
So this might be that PM Awas Yojana or whatever.
PM Awas Yojana. But then again, as absolute value, that is still very small part of the total housing loan book. But these secured products, so gold loans also, it was going up crazy.
By the way, there was some RBI action on the gold loans. You remember?
Yeah.
The import or thing?
No, on the loans. I
So
remember.
gold loans, maybe there was IFL Finance, if I'm not wrong, or
they got a slap on the wrist
by the RBI because again, gold loans, even though it's a secured product, they were lending it out in a very naughty manner. If a loan to value ratio.
I'll buy your dictionary after this.
So,
Go on.
Just an example, if loan to value, which is, let's say, for a 1 lakh rupees gold, they can only lend out, let's say, 60,000. They were lending out more money. Plus, a lot of
That is allowed?
There was
That
also
is-
something to KYC and all that.
yeah. So what was happening there was
Oh, now I.
Wait, you
yeah.
had written the story.
No, I had not written. This is
Nice
not.
excuse.
all these gold loan companies, they used to tie up with these third-party fintech people
Okay.
to help them source clients.
Oh, this was that assaying process and all that.
Yes.
Right.
So all this assessment should be done by the lender.
Huh.
But all of this was being pushed to these third-party
Fintech guys,
lenders,
yeah.
third-party fintech guys.
Right.
Because they made the process very easier for banks.
Huh.
And banks' it was a win-win. They were getting more business
Yeah,
quicker.
yeah.
For fintechs, it was a win-win. Even for consumers, it was a win-win because now process could happen.
Right.
But this also meant that a lot of fundamental checks like assessing the value of
Right,
gold,
right.
that was not happening correctly.
Acha.
So RBI, again, as he put, slapped their wrist and
This entire slapping them on the wrist seems like a big theme. So there was what,
Yeah.
Kotak, HDFC's credit card, Bajaj's EMI product, Paytm.
Recently, that four guys in this loan space, Navi was one of
Oh, yeah,
them.
Navi. I mean, they're now back
They are
again.
now back, but yeah,
I mean,
something happened.
this has been a significant year for in terms
so
of.
regulations and RBI stepping in, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And we could argue that if RBI had not been as vocal, maybe these players would have been on a lending spree much longer and things could turn way bad.
They're not watching this video. They won't give you a job. So it's okay.
Things could go way bad in terms of NPAs.
Right.
Luckily, the NPAs right now, they're not as bad as they could have been, but also because this banking books, how they're made, it's very fudgy. You'll never know the true picture up until things have gone really bad. So, slippages and NPAs for the next few quarters are more to look forward to. So for 2025, a good thing would be to just check how are the slippages moving.
What does slippages mean?
Slippages basically means if a loan has been given, for it to be categorized at NPA, for the next 90 days, the person has to default.
Okay.
Slippages is when this loan amount goes from here to the NPA bucket.
Acha.
So the more the slippages means the NPA book is going up.
Right.
And then the opposite of slippages is recovery.
Okay.
When something goes from NPA back to the loan
Right,
book, because now they've paid. So slippages going up is a leading indicator for NPAs.
So where are the NPAs most concentrated in?
Microfinance
Like, what do we know?
Microfinance was one space where the NPAs were going up like crazy. Like
So microfinance, the
Yeah.
context is this small ticket loans given to, let's say, farmers, small help groups and all those.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly in tier 2, tier 3 cities
there's
only, I
trouble
think
there?
mostly. There was a big trouble there. The NPAs were going up. I mean, there are a bunch of regulations that came in the MFIN space that
Multiple
there
lending
should
to
be
the-
a cap on how much % you can charge.
Okay.
There is a cap on, I think, the number of lenders that you can take loans from. I think that number was 2 or 3 that they
This
put
was
a
similar
cap
to
on.
your evergreening thing.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
this is what led to that.
I understand something though. How much of the slowdown in credit growth is because of RBI regulations and how much of it is because, how much is this correlated with the fact that we're now growing at 5.4%?
Wait, I have an answer. Good question.
I mean, even if I was a magician, I wouldn't.
You're not.
It's difficult to attribute, honestly. And everything is known in the hindsight only, especially for banks. Coming on to those NPAs, right? For now, NPAs are not looking as bad. But then again, we really.
This is a very slow moving
But
process.
it's the trend, no? Like, if it's the NPAs are going up and up, there will eventually come a point that something
it's
happens.
barely starting to tick up.
It's barely starting
Yeah.
to pick up. We'll have to see what happens. Also, NPAs are.
So wait. Too early to call a trend.
Too early to. And NPAs is a lagging indicator. In a
Why?
manner, things have already gone bad, only then they show up in NPAs.
Gotcha, there's a 90-day lag at the very least.
They'll have even slippages
Yeah.
because a lot of the times banks also have their own discretion on, let's say, putting it in this category or calling someone a willful defaulter.
Right.
That's on to them. So that's where banking companies ke risk management jo committees hote, they come into the play. That's what happened in 2016 when AQR was done.
Right.
Up until AQR, everything looked good.
Right, AQR is for asset quality review. So banks looking at their big. So this was, just as a very short history, prior to 2010, you had that massive industrial lending. But the problem with industrial lending and large commercial lending is, what's that quote? If a bank lends 1 lakh to you, it's the bank's problem.
It's your
So it's your problem. If a bank lends 10,000 crores, it's the bank's problem. So, you all know the names, right? DLF, Gammon, GMR, Unitech, I mean, I've lost track of all the Videocon, the famous Doots were all the. So this eventually blew up spectacularly. Then Raghuram Rajan comes in. He institutes this AQR asset quality.
But it didn't show up in the banks as NPAs.
Evergreening. Like banks were doing all sorts of shenanigans to sweep. Yeah.
दूसरे से लेके
Like they were doing all sorts of things, like lending more to repay the interest to just keep the NPA status away. I mean, it was a. I mean, let's not get into the detail. But I forget when he assumed office, 2013, 2014. He comes in, he makes a big push to clean up the books. And then since then, like he rightly pointed out, wholesale lending, which is essentially lending to industries, as a percentage of the total lending has consistently gone up, and it's even going down now. And this entire difference was made up by retail and unsecured lending. So it's, in the long term, this is one of the dramatic shifts in the Indian banking system. So for people interested, there's RBI puts out this financial stability report. There's a lot of data. We'll link it in the videos.
To tell you something, I think a few years ago, like 2019, 2020, there was this whole thing about how you usually recover all of the money that you give in retail. It's only the industrial guys that sort of recover the money. Has that story changed now?
I don't have good data, but if I were to guess, because I mean, if you go by anecdotal evidence, just because of the harassment, I think most people end up paying it back.
And more importantly, so retail lending में क्या है ना? Retail lending is much sparsely spread out. So these are very small loans compared to 1,000 crores of loans given to one. So retail by virtue is...
You can't do spam calls to a guy who's borrowed 1,000 crores saying like, sir, I'm loan company.
So retail by virtue is relatively less risky compared to... But then again...
I mean, it depends on how you've underwritten your book. Right.
But like if you had to sum up the banking thing, like what's going to happen?
Make him happy, dude.
So credit growth has been going down, but deposit growth remains the same. NPAs are something we should keep a close track of in all these areas which are overheated up until 2023. One more thing I think that we've left out, which might be a good segue into our next segment.
You left out.
RBI and its rate cut and how that impacts banks. So
Set the context.
Yeah. So up until recently, when Shaktikanta Das was there, he was very adamant on cutting rates for a variety of reasons, which we'll discuss later on. Adamant on not cutting rates.
Well done.
But now,
Being very clear.
No, sorry.
but now that there's new governor, maybe he'll cut rates. Regardless of that, if the rate cut happens, ideally, this is how we do economics 101, right? 101. If rate cut happens, loans get cheaper and people will take more loans.
Okay.
So ideally, this means banks जो loans दे रहे हैं, that will now get cheaper. But that doesn't really happen immediately, and it doesn't happen in a manner we think it does. Because what banks do, banks give out loans in different manners. So one is a repo-linked loan, and one is a MCLR-based.
Oh, yeah.
So if
Wait, our repo is over 6.5?
yeah, currently.
Repo is the rate at which a bank borrows from the government, right?
Government.
Why don't you guys go to... Why don't you guys do some Googling? Good time.
Repo is that, I mean,
don't think Googling will give you
But yeah, in an oversimplified manner.
yeah, I mean,
So what happens is whenever rate cuts happen, you'd ideally expect that your home loan will go down. But it depends on whether that loan that you've taken from a bank is a repo linked loan or a MCLR based. MCLR is just fancy way of saying repo rates do not impact it as much, but it's the cost of funding for that loan that impacts.
so fixed है ना?
Not really fixed. So
Okay.
when a repo rate
Slower reset time.
yeah, so it's a 6 months to 9 month period, whereas a repo linked
Almost instantly.
So if I were to give you an example for banks, private banks like अपना Kotak हो गया, right? Kotak and Axis.
अपना कोटक.
Whatever.
अपना कोटक.
So these private banks like Kotak and Axis, they have let's say 60% of their books repo linked. What does it mean? Now, if there's a repo rate cut, their loans will get repriced, which basically means their net interest margins
Will
can
shrink. Right.
faster than public sector banks,
Which are MCL.
which are MCLR based books.
Right.
So, which basically means, but then again, this eventually evens out in a long enough cycle.
Right.
But that's something that we'll have to look out for. Then there are a lot of research on sensitivity analysis of how much rate cut can have.
Did you do it?
No. But that's something that we should look out for. But then again, as consumers, the only thing that matters to us is how quickly will that impact our loans the amount of money that the interest we're giving out on loans, and that will depend.
I'm not borrowing. I don't know because I'm not poor.
Maybe some wedding loans.
No, he's.
So
It's only us.
that rate cut is a very interesting debate. So we have been at, I mean, there's been a pause for I forget how many, like since the last hike was in 23 or something, sometime mid, and since then RBI has held continuously for I don't know consecutive meetings. So their entire thing has been, and I think at some level they have a point, which is, so right now food inflation is close to I think 9% or something like that. And
9%.
Yeah, it's been very, very volatile, and it's mostly because of vegetable prices. And there's also, and the components have been changing. Sometimes it's cereal.
Recently, that potatoes went up or something.
So the top inflation, tomato, onion, and potatoes, the top has been this thing. This RBI's interest rate call is a very interesting thing. So now that our departing governor is out, so I'll give you a context of what he was saying. So food inflation has been one of the biggest problems in this inflation problem. Partly the reason for not having rate cuts is that the RBI thinks that inflation has been quite volatile. So to give you some sense, okay, let me look at this. Food inflation is at its peak somewhere in 23. It was about 10%, and it's been quite volatile. So it fell to 6, it fell to 5 base effect, which were done in the story. Now it's back to 8. This is partly because it's been a series of bad luck since 2020. Heat waves, then there was elections, climate change related factors. There was disease infestation. It's just everything that can go wrong for food items post-COVID period has gone down. It's true. I mean, RBI has a point in that inflation has been volatile. And even though typically whenever there is a rate cut starting in the advanced economies, and the Fed has cut nearly 1%, not nearly 1%. And the expectation is that developing countries like India tend to follow the Fed's this thing. But this time, domestic factors are playing a larger role in the RBI's decision to stay put. And they're saying that until and unless we see quote-unquote inflation fall below 4% target on a, again, quote-unquote, inside a quote-unquote durable basis, they're not going to cut rates.
But this is what the governor said.
So we don't know what I don't have enough insight on the current governor. I didn't even know his name until the decision was announced. But now, where do things go from here? So, like Kashish pointed out in the banking story, reservoir levels are high. Monsoons for most parts have been pretty good. But the only point of worry is that they've been bad in Haryana, Punjab, which is typically a large agricultural belt. And I think if I remember correctly, towards the Bihar region, they have been a little underwhelming. But South India, etc., has seen really, really good monsoons. Manrega demand, which is a leading indicator which is linked to the monsoon, has been low, which means people are not signing up, not asking for Manrega employment, which means the insinuation is that they're finding work on farms. That's a good thing. Yeah, they're finding works on farms, which means if they're finding employment, they won't sign up for Manrega. So that's the logic behind it. So again,
no other reason to that.
No. So far, as far as we can make out, we were having a debate yesterday saying that is there a story around some structural issues with Manrega? So far, we haven't done any research. Maybe that's a future Daily Brief episode. So things are, how do I put it? It's going to be an interesting first meeting for the new RBI governor. So if I were to bet, I wouldn't say, I think it's going to be a no rate cut. So until and unless inflation, we'll see this thing. But at the same time, the downside of this repo rate saying at 6.5% is that it's hurting consumers, in the sense that because if repo rate remains high, like Kashish explained in his MCLR, whatever he said, I can't recollect. So interest rates on loans will remain high, which means a larger portion of the household budget or the household income will go towards servicing EMIs, loan payments, etc., which means it paradoxically leads to the very thing that we were discussing, consumption slowdown. So that's the quick, how long was it? 1 minute? 1 minute state of the union of monetary policy. With that, let's wrap this up. Let's go to my favorite story, China. Yeah. Okay, let me set the stage here.
Why?
Yeah.
China so much.
So paradoxically, it started with Pranav. So when Pranav came into Zerodha, we created this new blog called Subtext on ZConnect. The idea was to write about things we could geek out on, fascinating topics about economy, markets, etc. And the very first thing I asked him to write on was a series of articles on China. I think he wrote a 4-part series, 3-part series. So it's really good. We'll link it in the description. It's probably the easiest and quickest way to understand what happened in China, why China is such a big deal. Why is China a big deal? Depending on how you measure it, it's either one of the largest economies in the world or top one, top two. It doesn't matter. China is big. China is also the world's largest factory, or rather, China is the factory of the world. Any single good that we wear, use, touch, feel, whatever you want to do it, has some part of it located in China, from the smartphones to even our underwear, I'm guessing. So some part of the cotton spinning would have happened in China. And there's that, at a very higher level, there's that saying, right? If China sneezes, the world catches a cold. And it's been a case like that. But to understand why China matters in the current context, I also think you need to have a very easy, or rather very rudimentary understanding of its economic model. So if you go back to 1970s...
Before you start, I mean, there was one particular month where we had spoken about China so much, like there was every day that we were writing out China.
I know.
So what QC is to Krishna.
China is to Bhuvan.
I know. I get made fun of this a lot. Dude, it really matters.
One more thing, I think this is a Freudian slip. The actual quote is when America sneezes.
Yeah.
And the fact that it came into your head is China sneezes.
But yeah, go ahead.
China sneezes. COVID. So if you go back to I think I had done one of the least watched videos on this. But anyways, roughly 1970s, India and China were roughly in the same position. So China's per capita was maybe some 420. India was 370, was roughly like that, which means they're more or less in the same this thing. But what happened after that is, I don't know any other English word apart from the word miracle to describe what has happened in the China. You might hate China, you might like China. Numbers are numbers. So for the next 25, 30 years, China is roughly going to 10% compounded. Hasn't happened. We don't have a single close example, forget example, in the history of humanity. And
How much does US grow at? Like, let's just
current GDP is roughly around 2 to 3%.
2.8 is a celebration in America.
Yeah. In Europe, it's zero. Europe has completely flatlined. But that's a separate topic altogether. So what China achieved is nothing short of a miracle. And then in 2000, there was a landmark event which China was inducted into the World Trade System. It is basically the entire collective West saying that we as the collective West approve that China is now part of the global trading system, which meant that China reduced a lot of tariffs. It made itself, how do I put it, capitalist friendly. And then China's journey of being integrated into global value chains began. So China became a key part of every single process for pretty much everything, excluding, even I'd go so far as to say even in some key services, but in pretty much any manufacturing good, China became a large part of the global value chain. So they started in the lower part of the value chain by producing all the cheap plastic
toys
goods.
And all those things, yeah.
But today's China is radically different from the previous China. China today is, at a point I still remember, a China male, that was a negative thing that you could say. You can no longer say that. China is now on par with some of the most innovative companies in the world. So then 2008 crisis happened, and what most people don't realize is that if not for what China did in 2008, I think we would have seen a Great Depression. What China did is it announced it can only be described as a bazooka. I think they spent more than $500 billion just pumping into the economy, building more of what they were already doing. More buildings, more roads, more ghost cities, more manufacturing plants, more of bloody everything. So, and then thanks to whatever they did, the global economy didn't really slip into a recession. And then there was a very shallow, when you look at the global GDP, of course, when you look at individual countries like Europe, it's a horror case. But global GDP as a whole didn't really slip as much as it would have otherwise, if you assume a counterfactual case. But then to do all this, where did China get the money? So this is where things get interesting. Chinese economic model is often described as what's called as an investment-led model, which means the state takes the primary role in directing capital. So the corollary or the other side of the example is India, US, etc. They're all more or less market economies in the sense that the markets, which is essentially private companies, decide on what to do with their own money. The government tries to influence it, of course, but not to the degree that China does, because the entire banking system in China is more or less the state-owned banking system. So China literally directs the flow of credit to the places that it deems important. This is not the case in any other I don't want to get into the ism debate, but socialism, communism, whatever you want to debate, in the other countries, this is not really the case. Because in India, the government doesn't wake up and say we are setting credit quotas, saying that half of it has to go to this thing. We do it with priority sector lending to some extent, but with the other this thing, it's more or less a market determined mechanism. So whether Kotak Bank, Apna Kotak Bank wants to give money to Reliance or whatever, it's Kotak Bank's call, it's not the government's call. So now, as soon as I say China is an investment-led model, to make that investment, it needs money. Where did that money come from? In a very loose sense, if you assume there are two actors in an economy, government versus the household, spending has to happen from one side or the other. So for the government to make the investments, China essentially, how do I put it, handicapped its household sector. So they deliberately made sure that household savings were appropriated from households into the industry. How do we do that? By making sure that the household's share of income in the national income is very, very less, which automatically means that income that would have gone to the households will flow towards the industry.
Then the savings rate is high.
Yeah, so that means...
I think what he meant to say was that, for instance, you would have conditions where factory workers would work for wages that were far less than they would even in like low-income countries, right? And that would go into corporate profits, and that corporate profit would get reinvested, and so on and so forth. Or you
maximizing the crop.
Or you would have, recently, for instance, China has stepped up like healthcare and social benefit expenditures, but until now, you would have situations where, I mean, there were just no social benefits. You had to take care of yourself for the entire...
You're on your own. Very little spending on healthcare, education, social benefits, which means pensions, etc. Wages were artificially suppressed, which means if there are annual wage negotiations between factory workers, etc., the government would intervene and say there is a ceiling on this. The other way of essentially is they put the foot on the pedal, in the sense that they put their hand on the scale and they tilted it towards the this thing. But this is nothing new in the sense Germany did this during World War I. The entire so-called South Asian economic miracle, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, it's essentially the same model. They take money from, in a very loose sense, from the households, give to the industry, say, go build everything, go manufacturing as much as you want. But as soon as you say investment-led, which means it's spending, but there is a natural limit to the amount of things that you can build. There's only so many roads you can build. There are only so many factories you can build. So China knew that there was a limit to this. Even as far back as 2004, 2008, there were so many debates, and including comments from Chinese policymakers itself saying that Chinese economy has to rebalance away from investments towards consumption. Now, what's the problem with investments, you might be wondering, is if the government stops spending, economy collapses. Why? Because the share of GDP that could have otherwise been attributed to government spending, if it shrinks, the households can't spend in. Why? Because they don't have money to begin with. Why? Because the government ensured that they don't have money to begin with. So anytime China decides to step its foot off the pedal in terms of spending, their economy wobbles. But having said that, you also can't take away the fact that China is a massive economy. Even if it grows at 3 or 4%, it's still fine. It's not
more than...
Yeah, it's more than most countries. So $17 trillion economy growing at 3% versus, $500 billion economy growing at 10%. It's not the same thing. So 2020, and then COVID happens. China does one of the most draconian things that modern humanity has ever seen. They had this famous thing called zero COVID policy. Their lockdowns were, it's like something out of a dystopian movie. Like if somebody sneezed, the entire city would have been locked down. It was literally that. So which means their economy...
yeah, there were a bunch of videos.
Yeah, it was really bad. Which means the Chinese economy flatlined. And in the case of US, even in the case of India also, to some extent the government stepped in and made sure that there was free ration. Some amount of money was distributed to households. There were a variety of government schemes. US is the most egregious example. They literally spent, I think, close to $5 to $6 trillion, which directly went into household pockets. I'm talking about trillions.
Like directly giving...
Government said, printed money, here, take money, go spend. The reason why US is the fastest growing economy today is directly a result of that.
And why crypto went crazy.
Yeah. Lockdown, bored, what was that? Matt Levin's famous piece, boredom market hypothesis. Like efficient market hypothesis, post-COVID, there was boredom market
This is how they name drop big guys, by the way, in the office.
But China did the opposite. They literally they didn't give a single penny to this thing. But they took the same amount of money and started pushing it into industry. But the households didn't get any money, which means...
Oh, they weren't doing, like US was giving
US
money
gave to households, China gave to industry again.
Because that's how their economy...
Yeah.
Okay.
So at least people would be employed, at least people would get some amount of wages, they would still be okay. So where we are today is China has an official growth target of 5%. They're roughly growing at 4.5%, but take those numbers with a pinch of salt. Like you can't trust, you can't trust Chinese economic statistics as far as you can throw a rock. They're heavily massaged, to say the least. But having said that, the size of China is undeniable. The fact that China is a key part of the global trading system is undeniable. And what's happening in China is also undeniable. It has really, really bad problems. The other, for example, real estate sector, which I missed in this thing. So real estate, construction and property sales all put together, like ancillary activities related to real estate construction put together, is roughly 35 to 40% of the Chinese GDP.
Okay.
So, like you've seen the stories about Chinese ghost cities, etc., right? That's the reason why China.
Like just for.
There are massive cities where there are high-rise buildings with maybe 3 people in the entire city. These are literally ghost cities, as the name implies.
Cities made in the style of Paris. So there is one Paris in the middle of China, that sort of thing. But it's this sort of thing, right?
Quick commerce won't work there.
So, I mean, the way it worked was that China would build up ghost cities and then the West would go and shoot videos saying, oh, look at a ghost city. And within 3 years, it would fill up. And then it became within 5 years, it would fill up. And then it became like, it's not filling up right now. That's how it sort of got.
But what led to this ghost?
No, in the sense that you make a building, it adds to your GDP. You make a road, it adds to your GDP.
Yeah.
The more you build, the more it GDP. GDP is a very dumb number. It doesn't tell you the quality of the expenditure nor the health of an economy.
But then it has to.
So it ended in the sense that, like I said, even as far back as 2004 or 2000, Chinese government knew that the real estate sector is a problem to be solved. So what they did is, in 2001, they instituted this famous policy called as 3 red lines, which essentially said...
In 21.
Yeah. So there are limits on leverage for real estate sectors. There are limits on how much money they can borrow. There are limits, and they changed a variety of rules around down payments, etc., which collectively meant that flow of credit towards real estate essentially flatlined. The interesting thing is, so the flow of credit to industry and real estate is exactly like this. So there was a reallocation of whatever credit was going into real estate into industry again, and we'll get to that later. But before that, you had a point to make.
So basically, I forgot the point I had to make. But I will make a different point. There are like layers and layers, right? So for instance, the local governments in China, they are funded through basically selling land to property developers, right? And basically a lot of these services are given at the local government level. 51% of Chinese government expenditure happens at the local government level. In India, that's like 4 to 8%. Like it's
not even a comparison.
So basically, although we feel like China is Xi Jinping just ordering mass projects, what China actually is a lot of local governments competing very hard for projects in their own territory and giving a lot of SOPs, giving a lot of services, etc. This entire model worked because of the real estate boom, because they were funding their services through property development. And like
Sorry, one second. The reason is that taxes as a percentage of income across the country is very less. I think China gets taxes as a percentage of total income because of obvious reasons. Like 8% of only 8% is from personal taxes of total tax collection.
But that would have been compensated by corporate taxes, right? Or corporate
It's all government money, right?
So
It's state-owned enterprises. Okay. Sorry, continue.
basically, the real estate sector was the hegemon in China, and then Xi Jinping went and So what had happened was that these real estate companies were basically leveraged some 2-3x, and they were sort of taking money whenever they'd announce a project. Then they would go and build another project. They'd sort of move money from here to there.
But were people buying? Like they were building homes?
So 70% of all Chinese household savings is in real estate. There's no concept of retail investing in China at all. They have very...
Also, is home their investment or a...
Both.
Like they live, like how it is in India?
It's everything. Like it is their version of Indian gold.
Oh.
Think of... there are layers and layers, right? So, for instance, China went with its one-child policy. And because there was the one-child policy, there was a lot of female infanticide and feticide. because of that, suddenly today there are 35 million more young men than there are young women, which means that women have a lot of power in the marriage market. So in the marriage market, if you are a man and you want to get married, even one house might not suffice. You might have to go like, I have 2 houses or 3 houses. Right?
Now, what happens if you take a hockey bat and kneecap a sector that accounted for 40% of your GDP? Your economy
Very
collapses.
technically, oh.
Yeah, they literally hit them on both the tongs.
Because of the three red line. Three red line.
Three
right?
red lines policy. Now, what happened after that? And also post-COVID, like I said, there was no support to the household sector, which means the Chinese households didn't really have a lot of money to spend on anything also, even if they wanted to. There was no concept of revenge spending in China. There was everywhere else except in the world, not in China. In fact, there was even revenge repayments. So post-COVID, what happened is Chinese households, whatever precautionary savings they had because of COVID, they started paying down their credit card loans. They started paying down their mortgage loans. In fact, they're doing the exact opposite of what the government wants for them to
Spending.
spend. They're not doing that.
So, which also means that them cutting their interest rate won't really move the needle, right? Because they aren't willing to spend.
So there's a
Was there a period of deflation, like prices?
Yes, there's an indicator called producer prices, which is essentially Chinese version of wholesale price index. So that was in deflation throughout 23 for various months. It's bad right there. So let me set this up. So you've kneecapped one of the biggest sectors of your GDP.
Kneecapped because of the three red line.
Yeah. So real estate sector is down in the dumps. In fact, since 2021, you look at various metrics, they're anyways down, various real estate housing metrics, they're down between 30 to 50%. Like new sales are down, new starts are down, sale of second-hand housing is down. It's really bad in real estate.
And when you're a country where 80% of your savings are in real estate, the psychological shock is not just ki, oh, my house's value has gone down. The psychological shock is that and my retirement
Did any
plan.
developer go
Evergrande.
Yeah.
But the thing with China is it's a managed economy. So there's no concept of default there. if there'll be a default if they want to be a default.
Oh, because
They send an email saying that, okay, you default. They're default. Because there are no market forces. I'm joking, of course, but that's how it typically works.
I think there's also one other big bucket of salt that we need to take with the story, which is that the Chinese don't really write, or at least write analytically about their own economy. So we are all relying on a lot of Western voices, and there is a lot of wishful thinking there. There is a lot of people seeing one small dip in a graph and going like, oh, now China is ruined.
Absolutely. This is one version of the Chinese story. Yeah. So in 2024, now China and India put together roughly are anywhere between 30 to 40% of the global GDP growth. Incremental growth of the global GDP is essentially China and India driving it. Now, if let's say 20 to 30%, I don't know the exact number.
he's boss, so he's allowed to.
If a third of the global GDP slows down, the entire world mathematically has to slow down.
Yeah.
So, but the thing with, so far I've painted a very negative story of China, but that's just one side of it. So this is not my framing. So somebody wrote a piece, I forget who it was called, A Tale of Two Chinas. So on the one side, you have the traditional Chinese economy, which is down in the dumps. It's horrendous. But on the other side, you have a Chinese economy which is kicking ass, which is essentially China's high-tech sector. I think China is the world's largest steel producer. I think it only consumes about half of what it produces. China has anywhere between 1.3 to 2x the capacity in solar, wind, EVs, etc. The global sales of ICE vehicles, internal combustion vehicles, petrol and diesel is roughly 70 to 90 million cars a year. China alone can manufacture 40.
That's half. More than.
Yeah, and the domestic consumption is less than 25. In fact, it's falling. Which means the spare capacity we are talking about is just astounding. There was a funny story. In Amsterdam, people are using Chinese solar panels as fences for their gardens.
Oh, because it's so.
Because China's solar capacity, like I said, it's 2x the global demand.
But then there's one thing that rare earth metals are also
so-
they control everything.
So there's a geopolitical angle to this. So China is, because China always had ambitions to be, because China is it has a lot of history. China was always a large kingdom, and they have their own history of being large once again. It's like a national restoration project of sort.
So China sees itself as the Middle Kingdom. It's always seen itself as the Middle Kingdom, and the rest of the world is China's tributary. That's the notion. Like geographically, even in their imagination, they're in the middle. There are a bunch of chotu guys on the side, but all of them, of course, bow to China. And a modern China, they probably imagine it like that. I don't think they'll be very interventionist in the rest of the world, but they will expect the rest of the world to kowtow to them. I mean, they're 50% of the way anyway.
So because of this, because of this idea of China wanting to be large, they were pretty big on self-sufficiency. And also they knew that eventually if they continue growing at the same rates, there would be inevitable confrontation with the West. So which meant that self-sufficiency, quote unquote, was a key pillar of their economic policy. They wanted to be self-sufficient in fuels, manufacturing, like anything. So your rarer point comes to the same point. Like, because tomorrow if there's a war between US and China over Taiwan, the very first thing that will go offline is the semiconductor manufacturing facility. So this entire chip war we'll get into is a direct result of that. Now, tomorrow, if there is a war between China and this thing, most of the shipping traffic that gets into China has to pass through the Taiwan Strait, which is essentially a narrow passageway between Taiwan and this thing. US is the largest naval power in the world. They can blockade it, which means China will be without...
Both are interdependent.
Without, like any fuel won't get in. So this happened in Germany. In World War I, the Western allies blockaded, predominantly UK. So Germany had to come up with a new way to turn solid coal into liquid fuel because of this. And there are historical examples. So,
but coming back to...
The reason behind China's EVs and all is because of that. Like if tomorrow you block my petrol supply, I'll drive my electric cars. I have no problem. So this all ties into their idea of self-sufficiency, but go on.
But since like you were talking about that people are using in Amsterdam as a, why was that? Like, why was that the case? So was it overcapacity since nobody was buying here in China, then everybody started like...
Yeah, I like how Pranav said layers. This has multiple layers. So the thing with Chinese economy is that, like I said, every state province competes with the other state province. There's no coordination between them. So they are all racing for the same thing. So that means if province 1 wants to compete for EV factories, province 2 will also compete for EV factories. They're part of the same country, but they see themselves as rivals. So because of this, there's a lot of additional capacity which comes into online. Because of this, there's a lot of quote-unquote wasteful spending that also might happen. But it's still a net positive for China because they're self-sufficient. And because of this, they've created...
But this is too much self-sufficiency, right? Like
China has China has multiple cycles where they overinvest, then they're like, oh shit, and then they sort of bring it down, and then...
But then what do they do with the... Like steel 50 ही चाहिए, पर 100 बन गया, so what do they do?
It's a very tricky debate, and one I'm not really comfortable making a lot of conclusions. So there is a theory that there is a lot of overcapacity in China. The numbers are hard to make it. So there's a lot of ifs and buts. So typically people look at factory utilization rate, which is they put an arbitrary number saying that if at 75% there's the factory utilization rate, that means there's no overcapacity. Because your factories are running at 75%, that means there can't be overcapacity because it's getting fully used. We don't know if that's true. Some people say it's 75%, some people say it's fallen down.
For China's
factories. I'm generalizing across a variety of sectors. The second thing is, going back to our earlier discussion about Chinese economic model, there's no domestic consumption, which means any good China produces has to necessarily go somewhere. Okay, guess the goods trade surplus of China.
Like in value terms?
$1 trillion.
It's trillion. It's roughly, I think, 1 or 2% of the global GDP.
$1 trillion a year.
Yeah.
And that's how much of the GDP?
Roughly 1 or 2% of the global GDP.
That's a really huge.
So they're producing $1 trillion worth of goods that the Chinese domestic economy can't absorb, which necessarily mathematically means it has to go somewhere else. If it has to go somewhere else, guess what happens? Other countries have to run trade deficits. You can't, everybody can't run.
Like just in
you buy more than you consume. Or produce. So it's maths, right? Somebody has to consume, which is the reason why US is the largest GDP. Like their entire consumption model is not only because they want to consume, it is also an economic necessity. So roughly the trade deficits run by UK, Europe, China, US is absorbing all this massive surplus that China has created in a variety of industries.
Which, let's be clear, it's not as though it's a terrible thing for them. I mean, their markets are overflowing with the greatest goods man has ever seen.
But then this goes at a cheaper cost, I'm guessing.
So
because
there are two sides to this. One, China is dumping. China is ruining our domestic competitiveness. China is undercutting us. China is selling goods at discount. They're dumping steels, EVs, solar panels, wind, whatever you want to call it. They're killing our this thing. There is some truth to it.
this is what countries are.
There is some truth to it.
Okay.
It's not the full truth, but there is some truth to it. Like I said, China is competitive in a lot of places, which it is the natural advantage. You can't deny that. There is a more philosophical and geopolitical angle to this. China is the world's leader in pretty much all the clean energy technologies. If we want this quote-unquote green transition, you can't pick a fight with China.
It is the OPEC of this market.
Like,
If tomorrow China's solar panel supplies go offline, let's assume hypothetical scenario where 100% of the supply goes offline. Who's going to produce?
yeah.
Like, take
But because everyone is dependent on China because they produce the largest.
you can cry, you can moan about China's dumping, but there is a necessity. Like, it's a very tricky problem, and
But is this because of a fundamental thing that only they can produce, or is it because years of labor
I guess this
expertise
comes
that they
back to
have?
the point, cheap labor and also the overinvestment, the amount of investment they've made in these.
yes and no. Cheap labor, yes, but the China's cheap labor advantage is gone.
But I guess it has to do with investments because the amount of surplus they run, $1 trillion surplus.
So this goes back to the Chinese model, right? So for the longest, in fact, China's EV policy can be all the way traced back to 2000 roughly. So they have been playing the long game. It's just the rest of the world was playing the short game. Rest of the world was thinking maybe 1 or 2 quarters ahead. Rest of the world is more like our listed companies. They're only worried about the next quarter results. China was thinking like a true long-term investor. So to your point, this is again another controversial thing. So I don't want to make value judgments here. China, the West collectively cries about China's state-directed subsidies. They are saying that for the longest period of time, China has been strategically directing credit towards certain sectors that it deems critical, which is nuclear, solar, wind, EVs, anything related to energy infrastructure, anything related to food, anything which is related to national self-sufficiency, anything that will be affected in the case of war with US, we want to be self-sufficient. They explicitly made it a national policy in 2014. And they more or less achieved everything except a few ifs and buts in semiconductor chips. Like even there, they're catching up. So, but this comes because of their subsidies. So there's a number. I think in 2019 they spent $240 billion in state subsidies. This is subsidies we know of.
Oh.
$240 billion or something like that. There's a CSIS paper, we'll link it. In terms of state-directed subsidies, these are constant prices. In terms of PPP, it's roughly $400 billion. So roughly 1.8 to 1.7% of the GDP goes to R&D and subsidies, which is essentially China spending massive. The closest comparison is 0.7 or 0.6 in US, Germany, etc.
But others also do it, no?
0.6, 0.7% of the GDP.
Not as huge.
Yeah. So this advantage comes because of that.
This is equivalent to what India does with PLI.
But in a galactically large scale, our PLA is what, some 20,000-30,000 crores?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Depends on the industry.
Huh?
Depends on the industry.
Our
He's talking about the collective number, I'm guessing. That overall number.
But still nothing.
PLI terms 8,000. That's the scope we are talking. Like I said, the reason you mock me saying that China, dude, I'm saying that you can't wrap your head around these numbers.
But then so they're dumb. You're saying there's a dual argument whether they are dumping or not.
Now, this is a nice segue into Trump, unless you want to add something.
We could go.
So, I don't have a firm view on whether China is dumping or not. So, there are artificially competitive arguments to make also. Like in some cases, China is simply competitive. You can't deny the fact. A BYD car is roughly 12,000 to 15,000 euros. Equivalent in Renault or Citroen or whatever costs you some 27 to 30,000 euros. You can't cry about that. Your German auto manufacturing as a whole is effed. But they were simply better.
There's also
So you are saying that's not dumping. But what if there were news report? No, I'm just asking.
Dumping and oversupply are also slightly different things.
Yeah.
Where dumping is where you sell it at a reasonable price within your own country, but go and sell it much cheaper than that price in other countries, basically trying to ruin all of their markets.
But this is exactly what I was saying. Talking about steel, like
So
steel.
China deliberately is not doing it.
I mean,
As soon as China's economy picks back up again, they will just absorb all that.
All of this
and
debate
you'll have
values.
like a shock everywhere.
So
but do you think the economy will?
no. So in this way, I'm comfortable making a prediction. I think the days of
China's glory.
China's 10% growth is behind us. But having said that, China is still growing at 2-3% is a big
Big
for
deal.
humanity as a whole.
Yeah.
So because of those 2-3%, there was a famous paper, not famous, there was a nice paper we wrote about it in Daily Brief also. This lady called Jennifer Lind in Dartmouth College. She had written a paper on how do you classify countries as global superpowers. So she said that China doesn't have to be the same size as US to be classified as superpower. China is powerful enough to cause all sorts of trouble to US. China still growing at 5% is still good enough for us to, because she gave the example of Soviet Union. It was 40% the size of GDP. I was telling Pranav. But Soviet Union occupied the collective consciousness of US for roughly since World War II till 1990. For 40 years, it was the primary enemy, and it was only 40% of its GDP. China is way past that if you look at by the total size of the GDP. Per capita, it's yet to catch up, or I'm mixing it up.
Like China is around 17, what we saw, and US is around 30 by GDP.
Yeah. So
30 trillion.
China matters because of this.
But one thing that's happened, right, is that there was, how do I put it, of our failure to understand China is also our failure to understand economics as it is, because we sort of hit the frontier of what we know, right? Because we thought we had it all figured out, that you did international trade, everything worked, everything was amazing. And then suddenly, over the decades, you realize that the countries that weren't trying to get into this globalized free trade system, those were the ones who were the biggest beneficiaries of free trade, right? How do you think about this new paradigm? I don't think people really know. I think a lot of the quote-unquote experts are sticking to views that are, I mean, there's an orthodoxy now, you know, that because experts don't understand China, how the hell do the rest of us?
Oh, by the way, there's also a pay for play angle in this. A lot of these people are employed by think tanks, which means their life depends on being anti-China also. So these are all pro-Western think tanks. There is, you can't deny the fact that this is there. And
Sorry.
a lot of research which comes out has to be taken not just with 2 buckets of salt, a lot of chili powder, pepper, and other things which will keep your senses awake.
You were going to talk about Trump, I think.
So I
that
think that-
Trump thing.
We are knocking on the door of 2025. We are recording this on 26 December. So as of 26 December 2024, there are a tale of 2 Chinas. In fact, I'd say tale of 3 Chinas, but I'm not going to get into it. Pranav didn't like it the last time I wrote that piece. The traditional Chinese economy, as you know it, the physical building part, it's in doldrums. And it's a deliberate policy. Xi Jinping doesn't want credit to flow to real estate. Xi Jinping doesn't want credit to flow to any old chemical plants, any old tire manufacturing plants or steel plants or whatever. They're done with that. They have enough capacity if they need it, if they were a war with US tomorrow. They're self-sufficient in the old, dirty manufacturing areas. So he made it a new policy to redirect flow of credit, state support, state might, whatever you want to call it, into the new industries, which is EVs, solar, wind, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, you name it. There China is kicking ass. So it's a paradox to even think about one country. Forget the globe. You can't say, like tomorrow somebody comes and asks you, how is the Chinese economy doing? I don't have an answer.
Oh, because one side is this, one side
How
is
do you
this.
answer this question? So, and also it is undeniable that China has a lot of spare capacity in a lot of industries. And it is also undeniable that these industries are hurting a lot of other countries. I'm not going to make a valid judgment whether it's right or not. I'm saying it is hurting. How do we process the fact that it is hurting is something, the world has to make sense of, not us. That is the backdrop against which Trump won his presidency. Now, Trump's entire logic, like we were discussing in the office, Trump is a president who gives voice to the people who were hurt the most because of the first Chinese shock. So when China joined the global trading system, lot of...
This is back in?
2000.
2000, okay.
A lot of uncompetitive manufacturing in the US, Europe, etc. moved wholesale to China. You could argue that this is a free market system working. this is the exact same damn thing that they wanted and it worked. They got what they wanted. But they didn't like the consequences.
US didn't like the consequences.
US, Europe, nobody liked the consequences. Entire regions were deindustrialized. Factory towns. There used to be, like, there was a GM plant, General Motors plant.
Oh, yeah.
The entire life of that town revolved around that factory employment. So people used to graduate college, they used to join that factory, salary used to flow to the local communities. There was a manufacturing plant for furniture. They used to make furniture, they used to employ local artisans. It was the traditional manufacturing system as a whole. But suddenly you had this labor arbitrage. China was very poor in 2000. Very, very, very poor. Which means you have uncompetitive labor. You have cheap labor in China. It's like water flowing downhill. All the manufacturing went to China. And large percentage of the population in the US was hurt by this. And in economics, there's the assumption saying that if somebody is hurt by job losses, in an ideal world, in a theoretical world, they learn a new skill and they go join a new factory. But real world is not economic policy. There are natural frictions to movement. There are natural frictions to talent. I mean, we don't want to get into it. So these people didn't find their voice in the Democrats. So Democrats were traditionally looked as a party of big business, free markets. I mean, in fact, until the 90s, there was very little difference between the Democrats and Republicans. Democrats were basically Republican-like. The 1990 deregulation boom was Democrats, it was not Republicans. And all this, we call it Reagan, Thatcher, whatever, it started under Jimmy Carter, who was a Democratic president. So these are all very red herring debates. So because of the deindustrialization of the large parts of the US manufacturing base, there were a lot of people who were pissed off. And there were a lot of people who were pissed off because they were saying that the government is not doing enough. So they didn't find voice in the Democrats. And Trump said, I'm going to bring back jobs from China. I'm going to punch China. He started speaking like one of those Bollywood actors saying that I'll go beat up 20% people. I'll get the jobs back from China. It's all dumb. It's retarded. It makes more logical sense. It's not even possible even in a very fantasy realm. But he gave them a voice. He tried bringing back jobs in 2016. Didn't really work. So in 2016, he imposed a lot of tariffs on Chinese goods. What ended up happening is China moved the manufacturing from China to Vietnam and Mexico. Now instead of manufacturing directly in China, they're manufacturing in Vietnam and China and moving it back to this thing.
So he didn't do anything.
Net damage was nothing.
As in?
As in the net impact of his tariffs was nothing.
Yeah.
The trading system quickly readjusted. This time, it might be different for a variety of reasons because last time there were a lot of quote-unquote grown-ups in the room. But this time, all the grown-ups, they're no longer in Trump's favor. Everybody is left. Nobody will take the job even if he offers them. He has a dangerous bunch of people around him who don't think in the traditional economics mindset has this. I don't know whether that is right or wrong.
I mean, but considering they are in a way competing against China, that's an advantage, right? Because Chinese economic model isn't.
See,
You
it's sort of like this, right? That the reason nobody did the Chinese economic model, the reason that people thought it was a stupid way of doing things, is that you require infinite smarts to run an entire economy. You need to understand a lot of extremely complicated things, how they play into each other, what are the level 2 effects, etc., etc. And then maybe you would have half a shot at running an economy. Whereas if you run, I mean, at least within an economy, if you just let things play out the way they will, you will eventually end up in an equilibrium where most people are kind of happy.
Okay.
Right? Now, on the one hand, what Trump is doing is moving more towards China. On the one hand, he is trying to protect the American economy, trying to bring jobs back, etc. The question is, can he do it the way China did? Because China got in PhDs by the bucket load, just sent people to the best universities, got them back, had them consult on every single thing. Can you have basically this guy who speaks like his Muhammad Ali, pull off that same miracle? Because for every China, mind you, there are 15 failures by the big side.
So there is also in the Chinese model. Calling it a Chinese model would be an overstretch because China
It's
itself
not
is
the
an
Chinese model.
exception to the.
It's not the Chinese model. The China's model is tried and tested in the history of economics. It's just that China did it well.
Tried and tested and it fails. Tried and tested. The fact that the whole sense of
See, I tell you what, I
central
get where you're
planning
coming from.
central planning is for you to assume that there's somebody sitting at the center who can do all these calculations, and that doesn't happen
I get where
as
you're
a rule.
coming from. See, I think it's one of those things where two kinds of guys tried central planning. One of those guys were the communists. And the communists, when they entered the project of central planning, went in with some very wonky ideas and they failed spectacularly.
Yeah.
The other side were the neo-mercantilists, right? These are guys like Japan, Korea, China, etc. These were guys who went about the whole thing a little smartly. These were the guys who put like very, very pointed tariffs on specific products, gave very, very pointed subsidies to like very specific
industries.
so on and so forth, right? The hit rate of the neo-mercantilists is definitely better than that's the problem.
And about the US trying to replicate that under Trump, let's say, assuming that's what he's going for.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say, I want to set the stage by saying nobody has any idea what Trump is doing.
Yeah.
We have no idea what he's going to do. We have no idea what will be the end economic policy. We have no idea what will be the end trade policy. Everybody is just talking about the wrong body part.
Also, one more thing, like you had said, कि 2016 when they did that whole thing, rerouting it and through, and they had thrown out all the grown-ups this time. The news recently came, right, when he assumes the office, he'll put some tariffs on Mexico and all those things. I mean, so I mean,
that's the point I made.
yeah.
What Trump says and what Trump will do, not only will be different, but we have no idea what it will be. So for anybody to sit with a straight face and discuss the fact that XYZ is going to happen, it is disingenuous.
I think I'll give one prediction quite confidently. See, what's going to happen is Trump feeds into an outrage cycle.
Yeah.
Trump says something that is outrageous by normal standards. Everyone picks on that. Everyone plays it 24/7. The public goes mad, and half the people hate him. Half the people are like, "Sahi to keh raha hai." This is going to happen again. I mean, you are seeing that had died down during Biden. During Biden, you didn't have to think about politics every day like the way you did with Trump.
Yeah.
But as Trump has come back, you're seeing that cycle sort of roll back into action. Trump puts out some random thing on Truth Social, not even a
He wanted
popular
to buy
platform.
Canada.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I like it. Oh yeah.
That's one where I'm like, "Sahi to keh raha hai."
Wait, 1 second. So the last
सुबह उठो कनाडा खड़ो कनाडा
last
खरीदो.
time he wanted to exchange Greenland for something. I forget what it
He's
was.
serious about it.
He wanted to exchange Greenland.
Or like buy it or something like that. But anyway, what you're seeing now is that he's putting out things on Truth Social, which is not even a popular platform, but people are starting to pick it up and run away with it.
It's his platform, you know, Truth Social is.
A lot of that is just verbal diarrhea. Like I don't think
Verbal diarrhea.
I don't think he's gonna go ahead slapping 100% tariffs on 15 different countries.
Yeah.
But because he has put it on like something that's less than even a tweet, every media outlet is running with that as though it is a concerted, like well thought out policy process.
But let's say if he does put some tariffs and all those things, that will affect. I mean,
Of course. So
companies won't like it, right? I mean,
no, that's what I'm saying. So going back to layers, there's always layers. So US is not China. So
US is not China. Okay.
companies won't do what the government wants. In fact, I think
because-
lot of politics is overstated. Like in fact, most of US industry could care less about politics. Like it's just a nuisance in their head. They don't want to do what they want any which ways because US government is not an interventionist party like China. So what the policy happens, of course it affects corporate profitability. Like of course if you increase tax rate, it reduces the margins or whatever. But unlike China, you don't have to worry about the government coming in and shutting down your business tomorrow. And worst comes to worst, US companies are ridiculously smart at managing and massaging their numbers. Apple moved his entire profit base to Ireland to get lower taxes. The same happens to this thing. In fact, it's all coming to an end, but I'm saying that can happen in US, which means a company can wholesale relocate out of the country and still be all right. Doesn't happen in China.
US can't direct credit, for instance.
Yeah.
US can't, sorry?
Direct credit.
What does that
Government
mean?
can.
Oh, like they can't direct the flow of
Yeah.
where the money moves.
That's what I'm saying. So all of these models, so all of these arguments are a result of wrong frames of economic thought in the world also. It is very wonky. It's like putting the wrong filter on your Instagram profile picture and thinking it's good. It's not. So
It's like, for instance, let's say China and US both believe that the technology of the future is self-driving cars. The US cannot let's say self-driving cars are the kind of technology where you have to sink money for 15 straight years and then you will suddenly see a quantum leap and people start working, right? China can do that. China can say, you give loans to this entity for the next 20 years and then ask for repayment. The US can't do that.
I'll add a but though. It's trying. It's trying with CHIPS Act, for example. So roughly what was it, $40 billion or whatever. But I'm saying
What's the CHIPS Act for?
it's semiconductor subsidies. So China is trying to, so because the problem with China semiconductors today is all the design software is by US companies, NVIDIA, ARM, Qualcomm, whatever you have. All the manufacturing is done in Taiwan by Foxconn, TSMC, etc. But Taiwan sadly is next to China. And China hates US.
If China attacks.
So like, I mean, I hate this metaphor, but chips are the new one. It's incorrect, but it's a dumb metaphor to go by. So US has this list called national security list. One day somebody in some bureaucracy wakes up and says, this is national security. That list has been continuously increasing since 2000. Everything is national security for them. Everything is critical mineral for them. I wouldn't be
Or list of those
I would be
17.
surprised if Donald Trump's hair tomorrow is critical minerals. Because it's a ridiculous classification. So they're trying at that. It's a very limited policy intervention. This is industrial policy in the sense that the government trying its hand at putting its finger on the scale to tilt advantages. So because all the manufacturing capabilities of semiconductors went away from US to Taiwan, they're trying to bring it back. It's partly the reason why Intel, despite not being competitive, is still being kept alive with government subsidies. So they're trying to do some version of China in very, very limited space, but like to his point, they won't be able to do it as
Because of the
wholesale.
smarts thing and all. Yeah.
It's not in their economic ideology. They don't have the capacity. They don't have. China built it, like you said, over decades and decades. For US to wake up tomorrow.
They're borrowing ideas from them without any conviction.
No, US had done it already. Like, for example, in the 1970s, US did it phenomenally well. The internet is a result of US military funding. Pretty much any major internet.
US internet.
Internet came from US military.
GPS came from US military.
Oh, I didn't know.
Lots of really important technologies came from that.
US military. Silicon Valley is directly a result of US military.
That is, yeah.
During World War II, they needed chips.
I think in the Chip Wars book, I think that mentioned.
Silicon Valley was not only tied to the head. Silicon Valley was US military for all intents and purposes. So, but they lost that capacity. So, let me give you an example. Today, US doesn't have the ability to manufacture bullets to send to Ukraine. Tomorrow, if there's a war between US and China, they'll run out of bullets within 1 year. This goes back to the same point which I said earlier. Thanks to the China shock, the entire manufacturing base was hollowed out.
But the thing is that with something like bullets, right, if you go into total war territory, you will set up those factories and start manufacturing bullets. Yes. Along the line. With something like semiconductors, if you decide that from today with full speed we will start semiconductor manufacturing over here, that plant will come online in 2030. Because like
Optimistically.
Because it's literally the most complex thing on earth.
Okay. Now, like, come to the CHIPS Act thing. You're talking about the CHIPS Act or something.
So here's where we are. Trump will come into office on January 20th. He's been crying tariffs. We have no idea what those tariffs will be. My base case prediction will be he'll do some sort of a deal with Xi. He'll give some, he'll take some. I think they'll find a middle ground. I don't know.
Because they're both interdependent.
Everybody is tied to the hip at everybody. Like, this world is not a wild west where you're a gunslinger and you can just go around shooting people. It doesn't really work. There's going to be a lot of collateral damage. Also, it's not like the other countries will sit with their hands tied together. Like, we are already seeing in the narrative deglobalization, geopolitical fragmentation, etc. Like, countries are becoming close together with certain blocks. Of course, the data is totally different, but narratively there is deglobalization, narratively there's deprivation, etc. If this happens, US will be the net loser because US's entire GDP relies on them buying goods and them consuming goods. If US economy is in a poor shape because they're not able to spend, US companies will be hurt, US consumers will be hurt. And there's a flip side also, inflation. Inflation, nothing hurts politicians like inflation, as we saw in the recent elections also. If Trump does something and the result is, let's say tariffs, the result is inflation, he's going to be voted out in the midterms. Like, the populace might be politically active, but the one thing they hate is inflation.
then there are more layers. So, for instance, the United States is number one in a framework of its own creation.
Sorry, I didn't catch it.
In their imagination, they're number one.
No, but in reality also, they're number one in a framework of their own creation. Like, they set the rules there, like, Acha, we will route investments this way, this is how money will come into the United States, etc., etc. And in this system they've created, they have risen to number one. If they try breaking the system, right? Because so many things are interconnected. You have like foreign exchange.
It's a domino.
Yeah, so
What was that? There was a famous saying, I forgot what, I think John Stewart said it. We're always looking for simplistic solution to complicated problems. This is like a two-line summary of this entire debate. So, look, I'd say it's a risk factor in 2024. Trump is a massive risk factor to the markets. I have a feeling that if I were to bet on it, markets are going to be more volatile than they were in the last decade. We're going to see an immense amount of not just financial market volatility, but also economic volatility. There'll be surprises all around. He'll start moving the markets by tweets. All that will happen. But for us all to, not just us, anybody to sit and say that he's going to do X or Y, I think it's intellectually.
It's more of an unknown risk than a known unknown. Yeah. Then what we'd like to believe based on all the things
See, we all crave certainty. With the Trump, that's the only thing you're not going to get.
But he's very good at insinuating all of that.
There's a concept of overturning, right? In the sense that for X to happen, it takes a long period of time. So how do you make that happen? By constantly talking about it.
By the way, AI was the theme of this.
Yeah,
I mean,
so- So my fascination with AI is its economic angle. So I'm really fascinated about what impact will it have on the productivity, what impact will it have on jobs, what impact will it have on people's lives, and what impact will it ultimately have on the global economy.
Okay.
So I'm not worried about transcendence style where Johnny Depp's consciousness gets updated, and I don't want to do those outlandish things. I'm not really interested in that. For me, the net economic impact is what I'm thinking about, because ultimately my job can be taken away by AI. So by necessity, I have to.
I mean, ours.
So by necessity, I have to pay attention to it. What do we know about what AI is going to do to the economy? We have no bloody idea.
Why do you focus so much on the economy? You just mean from the standpoint that there will be lesser jobs, or like people will be unemployed because of AI?
See, my frame of thinking is
Also, why AI is even a theme. I mean, there's a lot of money going into it. There's a lot of chatter.
I don't know if that entire debate about artificial intelligence and iRobot style movie is a reality. Having said that, I also don't think it is the case that it is a non-news. The reality is somewhere in the middle. But my gut sense is that it is a significant technological shift that is going to affect vast segments of the economy. I think we have enough evidence at this stage, even at the current level of advancements with LLMs, etc., to say that this thing is not a fad. I know many people would like to think that it is a fad. From whatever little I know, from whatever my vantage point, I don't think it is. We are already looking at the first wave of AI technologies on industries. Like, for example, I know there's a lot of nuance to it, but Klarna automated their entire customer support with AI.
Klarna is a fintech.
Klarna is the world's largest buy now pay. Your ex-employer PhonePe said that they've automated their customer support with AI. Even in Zerodha, we use AI in summarizing customer support tickets. It's given a significant productivity bump. And in fact, even in our own research, if you guys think about it, it has given us a...
I mean, the other day we were talking to that.
Explain it properly.
So what we wanted to understand how the Chinese economic model works in a very me. I wanted to understand how the Chinese economic model works. So Bhuvan was showing me on that OpenAI thing that you can actually talk to the AI and voice chat, and it will actually guide you as to how it works, and you can keep asking questions. You can do a full Q&A.
It's like talking to a friend.
Yeah, it's like talking to a friend. I mean, that her movie is real. I mean, so
it's crazy, right?
Really crazy. I mean, I still didn't get it.
It's one of those things that when Her came out, right, it seemed like such an out there movie. It seemed like the things that
when did Her come out? I mean, that sounds wrong, but yeah.
Maybe 15, 16?
Yeah.
I want to guess.
Yeah.
No, before that.
Yeah, roughly.
Anyway,
Yeah.
when it came out, it seemed like it was an unrealistic movie. It seemed like regular sci-fi fare. And now when you see her, right, if you're a power user of AI, you look at that guy and go like, why the hell are you not using this properly? Like, this is the stupidest thing you can do with it.
I mean, but yeah.
So I mean, I've followed the economic literature on the impacts of AI at a distance. So we'll try doing maybe a full-fledged video on it. But we don't have a lot of good data, especially in India. But from whatever little we can see in the US, the adoption curve is starting to move up. In fact, there are large amounts
Companies are adopting AI more.
companies and even individuals on their own. So I think it's there in the daily brief. I'm going to get the numbers wrong. We had written a story. I should know, but I don't. I think
Or ChatGPT had written.
neither deny nor deny that. I forget what industry. Maybe that information technology industry. According to one survey, the Stanford professor had done it. 30% of people use ChatGPT or one version of it at least once a week.
That's
big number.
a big number.
And this is in a time where most people actually haven't discovered how to use it.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, most of it is just like copying assignments, doing something like that. I mean,
personally, I think AI has supercharged my productivity by a few multiples, like maybe 5-6x. And although I consider myself a power user, I don't think I have reached anything near the zenith. So, and most people around me just don't use it at all. So,
yeah, fair.
it's one of those things, right? Like, there are very few technologies in human history, at least in recent human history, where there has been a sort of a step function increase in just the kind of what a technology allows you to do. I think computers have been one, internet has been one. Before that, it was perhaps the steam. Right? Every time that happens, society sort of tears itself apart.
Yeah.
After the industrial, I mean, think about it. The nuclear family came after the industrial revolution, right?
Oh.
There was, everyone lived on the farm. They used to work outside their home. The idea of an office came after the industrial revolution, right? So basically, there was a period after the industrial revolution where families were torn apart. People were thrown into random corners of the country. They were suddenly like changing the entire way they lived their lives, etc. That entire thing played out, and then we sort of got into control. We are still seeing the impacts of the internet. I don't think the internet has played out yet. I don't think we've adjusted our lives yet. When the industrial revolution happened, we had 80, 90, 100 years to sort of adjust to this new way of life.
But that's how it is, right? Like,
Yeah, but the rate of change is very low. Like internet, we can pull our hair and run on the streets, but internet is not even a decade old in India.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. Like, have you seen, like, for instance, how your grandmother or something would react to the internet? They're still not comfortable. Right? Unfortunately, the human ability to change is rate limited.
yeah. Or you can only change so much in a.
History will accelerate.
Yeah.
And you do not know what. I mean, I don't think any of us could legitimately say that we know what 2027 looks like. I don't think
Absolutely.
such short time horizons were the case at any point until now in history.
So the time between each incremental significant change was large enough. Steam engine to, let's say, airplane.
Fire.
Fire was literally 99% of humanity.
Yeah.
So even if you assume, I mean, we don't have numbers on how long humans have been around. So even if you take that example of 200,000 years, until 1700s, we literally had no mechanization. I mean, you had your mechanical implements or whatever. We were literally sleeping on dirt and swimming around in mud for 99.99% of humanity. It just blows my mind.
Coming.
Has a lot to catch up to do with all the external stimuli.
Coming to that economic literature on AI you were talking about, is there anything specifically in Indian context that was said? I mean, any Jobs Week report, like the Naukri Jobs Week report saying anything?
I mean, this has been my perennial bugbear. Our economic research is terrible. We have a lot to do, especially when it comes to all these things. In the US, even when it comes to something as new as AI, there is still a significant amount of literature that you can reference. That the literature is good, bad, beside the point. You at least have a very fuzzy and shoddy frame to situate this entire technological change in and start thinking about it. India, we have absolutely nothing. What the available literature says is that, okay, let me put it, the typical example that people give us, Industrial Revolution killed a lot of jobs. It ended up creating a lot of jobs. The example they give is the bank tellers became typists, Excel sheet created something like that. Like even though there was Excel, it didn't lead to the wholesale destruction of bank jobs. Even though cars replaced horses, those people found other jobs. They became, I don't know, shoemakers, cobblers, or whatever. It is a very handy way. There is some evidence to back it up, but it is a very handy way of saying that there is going to be wholesale change, but at the same time, there's not going to be a downside, and other jobs will be created to replace the jobs that will be created by AI. This is the default frame of thinking.
There's another angle that I want to point out on the economic front, besides jobs and productivity, is also the flow of capital. We've seen flow of capital also change directions when AI came into picture. And if I'm not wrong, I read a report where they said half of all the AI funding has come to India.
But are there any listed? I don't know.
Indirectly.
Who are the shovel makers in this industry?
So
In India you're talking about, right?
nothing. So it's essentially your chip makers.
Data center guys?
Proxy play is cloud providers. Google Cloud, Azure with Azure Cloud, those players like that. Maybe, yeah, actually that's pretty much it.
Like-
Maybe Microsoft because you want exposure to ChatGPT because Microsoft is a shareholder in OpenAI. So it's very fuzzy. There are a lot of these AI themes, etc. It's not direct.
But
Because
India specifically, like, I mean,
nothing.
can we count EMS players?
That's a stretch.
I
But
mean,
it's
like you do the packaging for another guy,
it's like
then I mean it's a
I mean, I'm running out of metaphors, but it's a very fuzzy stretch.
It's a rapper for a rapper for a rapper for an AI.
It's like you're 8
Yeah.
steps removed from the ultimate.
yeah.
Ultimately, I think
But India is far away in this.
when you aren't at a point of equilibrium, right, when you're hurtling towards equilibrium, no research that looks backwards will tell you what the equilibrium point is. That is unfortunately where we are with AI. We don't know where we will hit an equilibrium.
Absolutely. So, but it's just my fascination with the topic is that, like, I'm deeply concerned about the societal impact of it. I don't have any good answers about it, but it's been a fascination of mine because it is incorrect to assume that this is a technology. It will fundamentally reshape large parts of our lives.
So when you're saying fundamentally reshape, a thing that I've had in my mind for a very long time is that India is a very divided country of sorts. You know, there's the poor, there's the rich, and there's a big divide between those people. Considering the internet only has about 600, 700 million takers so far, if I'm having my numbers correct, the internet has not penetrated the entire country so far.
No, I think today more or less everybody has a
More or
choice.
less, yes. But considering AI accelerates, say Pranav was talking about how it's accelerated its productivity 5-6x, etc. Do you think that divide will significantly increase in the next, say, 2 years or so? What will happen? What will the societal impact look like?
There's one strand of research on AI and inequality. But like I said, we're all waving our finger in the air and trying to feel the pulse of the entire world.
For all you know, people might just leapfrog new technologies, right? You don't have to first get to your geo and then 3 years later get AI.
It happened in India.
Fair.
Most of India skipped manufacturing directly went to services.
Right.
So there can be those phase shifts.
But I guess I think here, since all of it is hand wavy, I think all of us can make an attempt at seeing what AI could be in 2025 and maybe just wrap this up.
This conversation at some level should have given you a hint about how action-packed this year was. We can keep going on. I mean, in fact, for example, I had on my list to talk about Middle East. I wanted to talk about the SEBI regulations, which it's just been one of the most regulatorily action-packed year. But
There is bunch of things happening in the SME
we
IPO
started
space.
recording at about 12. We are almost at 4:30. So, in the interest of people's sanity and capacity for future comprehension of information, we're going to end it here. Having said that, I'm proud of all the pieces that we have put out on all the unspoken topics. And as always, you can just go to our Substack. We'll include the link in the description, and you guys can, all of you can read any important story that you want to. We'll add a list of other topics that we would have otherwise liked to talk about it. Having said that, I think we'll call it a day. We'll wrap this up. And this is something we have done for the very first time. None of us really have been on the same spot in terms of recording. So we're not. I mean, Pranav and I have been. How do I put it? We have the talent for radio, not for voices, not for video. So please do watch this long ass video. Let us know how it was. And if you like it, we'll keep doing it in the future. But for now, thank you so much.
But if there's any story that you would want us to cover or something
Yeah,
like
please.
that, please tell
We are
us.
always here. So having said that, thank you so much for continuously listening to us and giving us your feedback. This was absolutely fun. And every day is fun for us. So with that, tata, bye-bye, and wish you all a very, very happy new year. See you on the other side.